The bone-chilling wind rustled, carrying snow as it beat against the dead trunks by the roadside. Louis sat in a shaky carriage, the wheels grinding against the icy hard soil with a dull creak. He looked down at the Northern Territory Pioneer Certificate with the royal seal in his hand, revealing a bitter smile. 3 months ago, he was hit by a dump truck and transmigrated directly into the body of Louis Calvin, the son of Duke Calvin, in the other world. However, before he could enjoy a single good day as a celestial dragon person, he was appointed as the Baron of Expansion, tasked with developing his territory in the Northern Territory. This was certainly not a good thing. The Northern Territory remains frozen year-round, barren and desolate, with the threat of glacial giants looming from the north, simply not a place for humans. Though the Empire nominally controls the Northern Territory, many areas are still under the control of the Snow Country remnants. In fact, just 2 years ago, a large-scale rebellion almost totally detached the Northern Territory from the Empire, which was suppressed at a great cost. Thus, the Empire realized that solely relying on the Northern Lords wasn't sustainable for long-term stability. The Emperor then ordered the major noble families to send their offspring to serve as pioneer lords in the Northern Territory, using land to trade for their power to stabilize the borders. At the same time, it also weakened some of the nobles' powers, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, the major nobles weren't fools and could see through the Emperor's plan, mostly sending some marginal family members to cope with the Emperor's command. Louis was one of them. Being the least promising of Duke Calvin's 12 sons, he naturally became the first choice for this assignment. Upon receiving the Pioneer Certificate, his family gave him 800 gold coins, a few carts of grain, 3 elite knights, 10 official knights, and 30 apprentice knights, and urged him to quickly hit the road. Judging by this setup, Duke Calvin clearly hadn't planned for his useless son to establish himself in the Northern Territory. As long as he didn't die on the way, it was enough. Dying in the Northern Territory would count as completing the task, emphasizing participation over success. No one believed Louis could survive in the Northern Territory, not even himself. A recent graduate, thrown into this icy, perilous place, how could he live? Louis pulled at his cloak, but it still couldn't ward off the penetrating chill. He couldn't help but mutter a curse. Damn, didn't they say every transmigrator gets a golden finger? Why do I have nothing? As soon as the words left his mouth, a mechanical female voice echoed in his mind. Daily intelligence system loading. Louis paused, and before he could react, information about the intelligence system began pouring into his mind. Daily intelligence system. It randomly sends a few pieces of intelligence related to him every day, covering resource locations, personal secrets, even future events. This golden finger is undoubtedly the ideal tool for a pioneer lord. The Northern Territory, as a place full of uncertainties, has various dangers but also many opportunities. In such an environment, the important intelligence pushed by the daily system enables him to avoid danger and acquire resources. It undoubtedly paved a wide avenue for him to become a powerful lord. What's more, even in the worst-case scenario, with daily intelligence reminders, he could escape in advance. Understanding all this, Louis could no longer suppress the joy in his heart and chuckled softly. The dark path of the Lord's journey finally showed a glimmer of hope. Daily intelligence system loaded. As the prompt sounded, a semi-transparent screen appeared before Louis, with several lines of text quickly scrolling across it. Daily intelligence update complete. 1. At noon today, the 3rd Prince of the Ironblood Empire was framed while inspecting the stables and drowned in the manure pit. 2. Duke Calvin's 10th daughter was born with the burst talent in her bloodline. 3. At dawn, the Northern Crystal Cod will appear 3 kilometers west of the glacial rift. 4. Night Roy mixed frost scorpion venom into your dinner stew. Filled with excitement, Louis read the intelligence from top to bottom. The first 2 pieces of information didn't help his current situation much, providing at best some psychological comfort amidst his hardships, such as ridiculing the 3rd Prince's unfortunate accident in court intrigue, and once again marveling at his father's abundant energy and incredible fertility. But when his eyes moved to the 3rd piece of intelligence, his gaze instantly froze. At dawn, the Northern Crystal Cod will appear 3 kilometers west of the glacial rift. Northern Crystal Cod. This is something rarely encountered and greatly sought after. Before departing for the Northern Territory, Louis, not wanting to await his doom, crammed a lot of Northern Territory knowledge, which happened to mention this fish. They live in extremely cold waters, and their flesh is not only delicious. Most importantly, Their bones contain a special substance that can purify the impurities in a knight's bloodline, enhancing their power. This stuff is priceless on the market. It's not just about being tasty, it's an opportunity to exchange for money, connections, and even boost combat strength. This system came at the perfect time. He was originally worried about how to establish himself in the Northern Territory, and now, opportunity has just knocked on his door. Calming down, Lewis continued reading downward, and then, his smile suddenly froze. Knight Roy mixed frost scorpion venom into your dinner stew. Lewis's Adam's apple bobbed as his gaze instinctively scanned the busy knights not far away. They were setting up camp around the bonfire, some pitching tents, others unloading gear from the horses. A few knights in charge of cooking were preparing ingredients, pouring chopped meat and vegetables into a large pot, with steam rising slowly into the cold night air. A knight with a simple-looking face was crouching by the pot, stirring the stew. It was Roy. A chill ran down Lewis's spine. A supposedly loyal official knight assigned by his family is covertly plotting to kill him. He thought these official knights, although they looked down on him, would at least follow the orders of himself as a lord. Yet some couldn't wait to send him off to the afterlife. Being dispatched to a god-forsaken place was already miserable enough. Who'd have thought someone couldn't wait till he reached there before making a move? Damn, it's truly hard to guard against. Fortunately, with the daily intelligence system, otherwise, he might have ended up in a grave. Outside the carriage, a knight's voice mixed with the howling wind called out, "Lord, dinner is ready." Lewis straightened his clothes, then slowly lifted the curtain and stepped off the carriage. The firelight illuminated the camp, with steaming stew bubbling in the iron pot. The rich aroma mingled with the cold wind, making one's mouth water uncontrollably. The knights sat around the bonfire but didn't start eating. Traditionally, he, as the lord, had to eat first before the others could start. Lewis's gaze swept over the crowd, finally landing back on the iron pot, a smirk tugging at his lips. The poisoned broth was served in a wooden bowl, emitting a tempting aroma. Lewis took the soup offered by the knight and slowly brought it to his lips, but suddenly stopped and turned to hand the bowl to Roy. "I have no appetite, drink it for me." Roy's face stiffened as he forced a smile and said, "My lord, that's against the rules. You should have it first. I order you, drink it." Lewis' tone suddenly became serious. Roy's lips turned slightly pale, and cold sweat seeped from his forehead. He knew very well what was in the soup. If he drank it, he would surely die. Knight Captain Lambert also sensed something unusual and gave a signal to the surrounding knights. They immediately got up and surrounded Roy. "Drink it," Lambert said in a deep voice. The scorching broth was forcibly brought to his mouth. Realizing he could no longer evade the situation, Roy suddenly tried to turn over and escape, but was firmly held down. Only then did the other knights truly realize the soup was poisoned. Lewis stood up, looking down at Roy, who was pinned to the ground. "You know the outcome of trying to murder the Lord, don't you?" Terror filled Roy's eyes. He knew the consequences, of course. "Who ordered you to poison?" Lewis' voice was unhurried. Roy answered with a trembling voice. It was Lord Benjamin. He ordered me to poison." Benjamin was Duke Calvin's second son, Lewis' older brother. The knights' gazes all turned towards Lewis. They were all knights of the Calvin clan, well aware of the open and covert struggles between the brothers. But for a family member to backstab the Lord before he even had a chance to establish himself, it was still chilling. Roy continued hesitantly. "He promised that as long as you were killed, I could return to the south and that he'd arrange a new position for me, at least as a knight captain." Upon hearing this, the faces of the knights surrounding him grew even more unsightly, yet Lewis let out a low laugh. If he guessed correctly, his brother intended to completely eliminate a future contender for the title. The Calvin clan's dukedom wasn't inherited by the eldest son, but by the strongest. No matter how useless Lewis seemed now, as long as he was alive, he remained a bloodline of Duke Calvin and had a right to inheritance. Moreover, if he died en route to the Northern Territory, the family would inevitably send another brother to complete the mission. This meant that Benjamin not only eliminated a rival, but could continue to deplete the other brothers of the family, achieving multiple goals at once. Quite a clever plan. Roy held onto a sliver of hope as he looked at Lewis with pleading eyes. "My lord, I was coerced. I'm just a knight. Lord Benjamin ordered me. I dared not disobey. Please spare my life. I'm willing to swear allegiance to you." "Lambert," Lewis spoke in an even tone. "Yes." The knight captain stepped forward, drawing his longsword. Roy was utterly panicked, struggling desperately. "My lord, spare me. I will never. PSST. A flash of silver, and blood splattered onto the snow. Roy's pleas were abruptly cut short, his head rolling to the ground, dying with wide open eyes. Lambert sheathed his sword, calmly stating, "The traitor has been executed." Yet within the camp, the atmosphere was somewhat subtle. The observing knights remained silent, a complex emotion flickering in their eyes. Roy betrayed the Lord and rightly deserved death, an indisputable fact. But his actions, were they truly just out of greed? He wanted to return to the south, not be trapped and die on this cold wasteland. And what about them? Were they any different? All of them knew what going to the Northern Territory meant. It was a place of exile, the territory with the highest mortality rate. No one came willingly, and no one didn't want to return. At that moment, no one dared to look at the head rolling on the ground, afraid of seeing their own reflection in its severed face. Confusion and helplessness slowly washed over them like a tide. Under the night, the campfire burned, reflecting the emotions clearly in their eyes. Louis saw it all and then took a step forward. "Anyone who wants to leave, you can go now." The group was startled, lifting their heads to look at him. "I will personally write a letter to the family, absolving you of guilt." Louis paused, his gaze sweeping over everyone's face. "But after today, anyone who leaves will meet the same end as Roy." No one spoke, and no one dared to move. They weren't fools, even with a letter from Louis. The family might not forgive them for deserting their posts. What awaited them could be even worse punishment. Staying in the Northern Territory might be a dead end, but returning was not necessarily a path to survival. Louis looked at these silent knights and suddenly let out a light laugh. He put away the earlier aura of killing. His voice became calm. "You all think coming to the Northern Territory is a death sentence. You also know why you were sent here, isn't it? Because you have no backing in the family, making you disposable trash." Louis paused, then his tone suddenly became firm and powerful. "But I don't believe so. You are not trash. You became apprentice knights, even official knights, through your talent, your effort, through countless real battles. And those who sent you here, they are nothing but parasites hiding in the castle, indulging in pleasure." He slowly skinned everyone, and at this moment, a slight wavering appeared in each pair of eyes. "Have you ever thought that there might be a possibility if we can survive on this permafrost? If we can establish our footing here, perhaps the darkness before dawn will be long, but the sun will eventually rise. I don't know if we can all wait for that moment, but I swear by the dragon ancestor, if that day comes, the glory brought by the sun, I will share with you all." Louis slowly looked at everyone, a slight wavering appearing in each pair of eyes. "For the Calvin family, you are insignificant, pawns to be sacrificed at any time. But on this land full of opportunities, anything is possible. Someone here might become a baron, a viscount, even a count one day. Of course, you can continue to wallow in your fate, continue to lament every day, considering yourself halfway in the grave. Or you can join me on this forsaken land, holding the future firmly in your own hands." Silence. Dead silence. The night wind howled. The campfire flickered slightly, reflecting complex faces. Suddenly, bang, a low thud broke the night. Knight Captain Lambert knelt on one knee, his right fist pounding fiercely on his chest. "I swear to follow my lord to the death." Then the second, the third, the fourth. "I swear to follow my lord to the death. I swear to follow my lord to the death." The knights knelt one by one, their right fists pounded heavily on their chests. Early the next morning, after the baptism of chicken soup the previous night, a noticeable change occurred in the knights' mood. They were no longer merely mechanically performing tasks, their movements were faster, and there was a hint of fighting spirit in their eyes. Some began to proactively check their equipment, others discussed the situation in the Northern Territory, and some even started thinking about how to defend the camp, even though the cake drawn by Louis seemed so distant. But compared to waiting in a daze for death, having a goal to pursue is surely much better. Of course, Louis knew that a passionate speech alone could not completely change their mindset. Without tangible benefits, morale would soon dissipate again. He had to immediately bring out real benefits so that these knights could see genuine hope. On the icy river, the cold wind was fierce. The knights looked at the thick layer of ice under their feet, exchanging puzzled glances with each other. "Can we really catch fish here?" someone muttered. "The Lord said so. Let's give it a try." Lambert was the first to swing a hammer and struck the ice hard. Many knights secretly laughed in their hearts. Do they really think they can catch fish by randomly finding a river and smashing a crack in the ice? This lord is still too naive. But no one dared to defy Louis's orders. So the knights followed his instructions and began breaking the ice with their weapons. Thud, thud, thud. Soon, a narrow crack appeared, and the deep, cold river water surged out. A large net was slowly lowered into the water, and everyone held their breath, staring intently at the crack. Suddenly, the net rope tightened. Pull. The next second, a silver flash appeared, and a northern crystal cod was pulled out of the water, struggling fiercely on the ice. Good heavens, there really is fish. Quick, quick, catch them, don't let them escape. The knights eagerly joined in, swinging the fishing nets with excitement. Over and over, they lowered and raised the nets, pulling up northern crystal cod one after another, their scales reflecting dazzling brilliance in the morning light. They counted a total of 12. At this moment, a knowledgeable knight exclaimed excitedly, "These are northern crystal cod, a rare delicacy from the extreme cold. Its bones can purify the blood and enhance strength." Upon hearing this, the knight's breathing suddenly became rapid. They understood very well what purifying the blood meant, not only immediately enhancing strength, but also increasing a knight's future potential. Such treasures might only be tasted a few times in a lifetime by the nobility. If only they could take a sip. While they were lost in their fantasies, they heard Lewis's casual words, "Half of these fish are for you. We'll make fish soup later." A short sentence, like thunder, exploded among the knights. This was something they never even dared to dream of. Knights exiled to the northern territories, when have they ever had such grace? The knights were in an uproar. "Lord, are you serious?" A knight suddenly looked up, his voice trembling with excitement. This is northern crystal cod. Those southern nobles might not even get to eat it a few times in their lifetime. Long live the Lord. Excitement, shock, disbelief, various emotions intertwined, finally transforming into a chorus of praise. Soon, a big pot was set over the campfire, the boiling fish soup bubbling, exuding a strong, fresh aroma. After being stewed, the fish soup presented a faint silvery white color, as if light glimmers flowed within it, like a gift from the heavens. When the fish soup was thick and rich, a bowl was filled and handed to the knights. "Can we really drink this?" A knight holding a wooden bowl, his hands trembling, not out of fear, but disbelief. "Stop talking and drink." Lewis raised his own bowl and drank it down without hesitation. The soup flowed down his throat, energy quickly spreading from his stomach to his limbs, an invisible warm current washing away the impurities in his blood. Seeing this, other knights hurriedly picked up their wooden bowls and eagerly gulped down the fish soup. At the moment the hot soup slid down their throats, their movements stalled for a moment, as if something within them awakened. The next moment, they all sat cross-legged, closed their eyes, focused their minds, and swiftly circulated their breathing techniques, greedily absorbing this indescribable energy. Afraid of wasting even the slightest bit, someone trembled slightly, feeling the sensation of being cleansed deep within their blood. A sense of lightness enveloped their entire body. Someone gritted their teeth, enduring the burning within them, as if their bones and blood were undergoing some transformation. The camp was silent, only the sound of steady breathing rising and falling, merging into a kind of invisible resonance. Suddenly a startled cry shattered the silence. My body." A young apprentice knight's eyes widened, a peculiar light emerging deep within his pupils. Boom! A faint silver light emanated from him, causing the knights to be momentarily stunned. Then their pupils contracted sharply. The aura of an official knight. He advanced. No sooner had the words fallen, another apprentice knight also shuddered violently, a faint light oozing from him, surprisingly also breaking through the realm. Deathlike silence, followed by a thunderous burst of clamor. "It's insane, truly insane. Just by drinking a bowl of fish soup, can one directly advance?" The knight's gaze toward Lewis completely changed. Just a few hours ago, they were still doubting what qualifications this exiled to the Northern Territory disgraceful lord had to lead them. Was his promise really reliable? Was the dawn he spoke of just a wishful thinking? But now, all doubts had long been transformed into endless admiration. They personally witnessed two apprentice knights breaking through and advancing into official knights in a short time. Such things in the territories of southern nobles required a long cultivation and vast resources, whereas here, it was merely a bowl of fish soup. Even if other knights did not directly advance, their strength was also significantly enhanced. This matter was simply incredible, even making one suspect if it was an illusion. And bringing all this about was merely Lewis's casual gesture to obtain such precious treasures. They certainly had no knowledge of the intelligence system's existence, only feeling that Lewis received divine grace. And what amazed them most was that Lord Louis generously shared these northern crystal cod with them. Things so precious that even the nobility couldn't enjoy, Louis shared with them so easily. At this moment, all the knights were immensely grateful to Louis, no longer doubting the grand vision he painted last night. All doubts had been cast aside. Now they had only one common goal: to unite behind Louis and embrace the beautiful future that belonged to them. Long live the Lord, long live Louis, the knights shouted in unison, their excited voices echoing across the icy and snowy land of the Northern Territory. The grace of Lord Louis cannot be repaid. Louis sat cross-legged, adjusting his breathing, as the tidal breathing technique naturally began to operate within him. Breathe in, breathe out. The deep and prolonged sound of his breath echoed within his chest, like the rise and fall of the tides, absorbing and refining the energy brought by the northern crystal cod. The tidal breathing technique is the ancestral breathing technique of the Calvin clan. With the core of bloodline surging like ocean tides, it emphasizes a cycle of repetition, unleashing power as the tide rises and returning to stability as it falls. Under the wash of this gentle yet violent energy, it seemed Louis's bloodline was being reshaped. He could feel the speed of the blood flow within him accelerating, his meridians more unimpeded, and even his bones slightly burning as if undergoing a transformation. Finally, with a slow exhalation, the heat within him gradually settled, returning to calm, and he advanced. Mid-tier official knight. At such a young age, this kind of strength would already be considered a genius among ordinary people. 1 in a million, yet among Duke Calvin's offspring, he was still merely a bottom-ranked wastrel. After all, his elder brother was already a peak knight, with a great military record and significant contributions to the empire. In this world, the power of a knight stems from the awakening of their bloodline. Not everyone can become a knight. Only those with sufficiently strong bloodlines can activate the dormant knightly power within. And once on the path of the knight, there are 6 main stages: apprentice knight, official knight, elite knight, extraordinary knight, peak knight, legendary knight, each with a significant gap between. Of course, Louis was no longer in a rush now. With the daily intelligence system in hand, future opportunities would not be lacking. After fully absorbing the essence of the fish soup, Louis slowly stopped the tidal breathing technique and opened his eyes. He immediately realized that the surrounding knights were looking at him with eyes of admiration. In the next moment, deafening cheers echoed through the camp. Long live the Lord. Hearing the thunderous cheers, Louis finally breathed a sigh of relief. This signified that his prestige had been initially established, and at least for now, he no longer needed to worry about the knights' loyalty. After the cheering subsided, Louis looked at Lambert beside him and asked, "How far are we from Frost Halberd City?" Lambert respectfully replied, "About 200 kilometers. That means a journey of 5 to 6 days. Louis nodded slightly, then decisively ordered, "Accelerate, and strive to arrive by the afternoon 3 days later." Lambert respectfully responded, "Understood." Under normal circumstances, the team could never travel so quickly, especially on this icy wasteland. But now, the knights' morale was at its peak. To achieve such a marching goal was more than feasible. Frost Halberd City, the capital of the northern province, is also the most important military and political center of the Northern Territory. The primary task for Louis on this trip was to choose his pioneering territory. Naturally, the sooner he selected, the greater the benefit. But what really made him eager to rush to Frost Halberd City were the 3 pieces of intelligence refreshed by the system today. 1. 3 days later, a slave merchant will bring Weir, who has the potential of a peak knight, to the black market of Frost Halberd City. 2. 3 days later, the alchemy apprentice Hilco, wanted by the Golden Marrow Guild for stealing a secret formula, will disguise as a slave and be brought to the black market of Frost Halberd City by a slave merchant. 3. Duke Edmund is furious as all the noble families send their wastrel heirs to the Northern Territory. The first piece of intelligence greatly surprised Louis. A peak knight, in this world, is already considered a top-tier T1 level battle strength. Although not as rare as the legendary knights, yet every peak knight is nearly a military commander or a pillar of the kingdom, regarded as a cornerstone by any power. The current Weir probably hasn't yet fully matured, but just the potential to enter the realm of a peak knight is enough for Louis to invest in him. The second piece of intelligence was also highly valuable. In this world, an alchemist is akin to a chemist, skilled in handling various magic items, even capable of converting low-cost materials into high-value goods. and is a talent fiercely contested by major powers. The Calvin clan has only 3 official alchemists, and although the alchemy apprentice is not yet fully mature, they remain extremely scarce. Lewis's plan was simple: first pretending to nonchalantly buy Hilko, then observe secretly. If he indeed had potential and posed no danger, he would be kept and nurtured. After all, the price of a slave shouldn't be too high. As for the third, even without the intelligence system, Lewis could foresee this event, as all the noble families compete to send unpromising offspring to the northern lands. As the provincial governor, Duke Edmund is naturally beside himself with rage, but from Lewis's perspective, this may not necessarily be a bad thing. If maneuvered well, it could become part of his bigger plan. Since Frost Halberd City harbors so many opportunities, he must reach it as soon as possible. Damn it, a bunch of blood-sucking parasites. The Empire sent them here to defend the Northern Territory, not to send a bunch of freeloaders to hinder efforts. The reports, thick and heavy, were slammed onto the desk in the office of the governor's mansion. Papers scattered everywhere, highlighting Duke Edmund's furious face. 2 years ago, a rebellion almost detached the entire Northern Territory from the Empire's control, with the rebels even breaking the outer walls of Frost Halberd City. Duke Edmund led the elite forces in a bloody battle for 3 months, before barely suppressing the rebels. But at what cost? The border fortress was destroyed, granaries were burned, half of the troops were lost, and his only son was killed. The order in the entire Northern Territory has yet to be fully restored. This time the Emperor finally realized that merely stationing troops was entirely insufficient for maintaining stability. Thus, a strategy was devised to have nobility's offspring come to the Northern Territory to pioneer and stabilize the borders with their strength. But these idiotic noble families, do they truly intend to send their family elites to the Northern Territory to risk their lives? What a joke! A bunch of wastrels has been sent to the Northern Territory. Though there are some normal individuals, they are the exception. Duke Edmund scoffed in his extreme anger, grabbing a report and flipping it open. Let's see what kind of goods have they sent. The third son of the Elven clan, rumored to be a compulsive gambler, has a debt enough to buy 3 mansions in the royal capital. The young master of the Grant clan, reputed to be only 15, is already a distinguished guest at all of the Empire's renowned establishments. The 8th son of Duke Calvin, idling around daily, relying on family resources, barely reaching the level of a low-tier official knight. An utter wastrel. Is this a group of noble offspring? This is a delivery of pleasure-seekers, gamblers, and drunkards. A bunch of pampered fools. Their ancestors forged the realm with iron and blood. Yet now they are only concerned with power struggles, scheming and plotting. In their eyes, other than their family's interests, where is there room for the Empire's safety? In his uncontrollable rage, Duke Edmund slammed his fist on the table. Even the solid wooden table groaned under the strain. The atmosphere in the room was so oppressive it was suffocating. His staff bowed their heads, not daring to speak. After a while, Edmund took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the fury in his heart, and sat back in his chair, his gaze icy. Forget it. Since these fools have rolled in, let them fend for themselves. The Northern Territory still relies on us. On the snow-covered ground, a convoy of more than 40 knights was slowly approaching Frost Halberd City. In the center of the convoy, a pitch-black carriage moved steadily, with a flag bearing the Crimson Moon emblem hanging from its roof. Such a large formation naturally drew the gate soldiers' attention, and they all warily stared at the approaching group. As they neared the city gate, a tall young man slowly descended from the carriage. He raised his hand to remove his hood, revealing a handsome face. I am Lewis Calvin, the Empire-conferred Baron of Expansion, here to see Duke Edmund. The soldiers exchanged glances, their eyes filled with surprise. The Calvin clan is one of the 8 great clans of the Iron Blood Empire, known even in the Northern Territory. Although they didn't know this young man's status within the Calvin family, he was certainly not someone they, as ordinary soldiers, could slight. One of the soldiers turned and went into the city to report. Shortly thereafter, a middle-aged official came briskly. Lord Lewis, the Duke is aware of your arrival. Please follow me into the city. So, led by the official, Lewis and his party passed through the heavy city gates and stepped into Frost Halberd City. Although the streets within the city were wide, they were full of potholes, with snow mixed with mud, leaving a trail of muddy footprints as they passed. Most of the buildings were constructed of stone and wood, appearing rough and dilapidated, with even some ruins seen collapsing under the wind and snow. Pedestrians on the streets were few, roughly divided into two categories. One category was the Northern Territory soldiers in fur coats, their faces full of fatigue, eyes filled with the indifference brought by long battles. The other category was the civilians wrapped in coarse cloth, their expressions numb, focused only on rushing along the road. Lewis glanced over these scenes without any inner turmoil. Considering the Northern Territory's scarcity of resources and frequent wars, maintaining the current order was already quite remarkable. Duke Edmund is inside. The official led Lewis and his group to the governor's office. The interior had no overly luxurious decorations, only a heavy large table, several old bookshelves, and a deep blue military flag hanging on the wall. A middle-aged man sat behind the desk, his face marked by a wicked scar stretching from the corner of his left eye to his chin, making his stern face appear even sharper. His aura was like an immovable fortress, exuding a suffocating sense of oppression. This man was the ruler of Frost Halberd City, the de facto controller of the Northern Province. Duke Edmund, a mid-tier official knight. He scrutinized Lewis, his gaze filled with disdain. A scion of the Calvin family. Lewis's expression remained unchanged as he nodded slightly. Yes, you do look rather decent. Edmund's lips curled slightly, his tone laced with contempt and sarcasm. Compared to your illustrious elder brother, you certainly look more like nobility. This condescending attitude didn't surprise Lewis. After all, this is a world where the strong prey on the weak, and strength is the most powerful credential. Being looked down upon by a renowned peak knight due to his own weak strength was normal. Thus, he couldn't be bothered with idle chatter and took out the pioneer proof with the royal seal, saying, "I'm here to register my expansion territory." Edmund took the pioneer proof, flipped through it casually, confirmed Lewis's identity as a pioneer lord, and then pulled a map from a stack of documents on the table, spreading it on the desk. Apart from the areas marked in red circles, you can choose anywhere else. Lewis looked down. It was a detailed map of the Northern Province. The Northern Province was vast, roughly half the size of Russia in his previous life. However, there were only a dozen or so red circles on the map, marked as areas unavailable for selection. The available choices were plentiful, which made Lewis somewhat excited. To carry out this development plan, the Empire issued a complete set of the Northern Territory Pioneer Order. One clause clearly stipulated that all new pioneer lords must register and choose their initial development land at the governor's mansion, with priority given to those who arrive first. It appeared he was among the earliest pioneer lords to arrive. Other noble scions sent by their families were likely delaying, not willing to come to the Northern Province, postponing their arrival as long as possible, not taking this matter seriously at all. This was excellent news for him. Lewis gazed at the intricate map, lost in thought. In recent days, he had been organizing the various intel provided by the system for this very moment. The diverse information from the daily intelligence system intertwined in his mind, which he constantly filtered and compared, searching for the most suitable territory for development. Indeed, he already had several ideal targets in mind, so this selection didn't take too much time. He reached out and circled a spot on the map, looking up at Edmund. Here. Edmund looked down at the location Lewis pointed to, and a hint of surprise flickered in his eyes. It was in the southeast of the Northern Province, at the junction of Cyan Rock Rift and Grey Moss Tundra, 75 kilometers from Frost Howl Fjord. Did this kid unexpectedly choose such a prime location at a glance? This area possessed one of the rare slightly warmer places in the Northern Province, able to grow some cold-resistant crops in seasons other than the dead of winter. This alone surpassed most areas in the Northern Province. Moreover, a nearby stream ensured sufficient water supply and provided fishing for subsistence. More importantly, some cold iron veins were present, and although extremely challenging to mine, if suitable methods were found, they held considerable development potential. In this perennially frozen, resource-scarce harsh land, this place could indeed be considered one of the relatively prosperous areas. The Duke lifted his head, reassessing the young man before him. He had presumed him to be just an ordinary foppish noble, never expecting him to know how to select a territory location, clearly indicating he was not as simple as he seemed. With great interest, Duke Edmund stared at Lewis and unexpectedly praised, "A good choice." Lewis listened to Edmund's praise without showing any pride. "Thank you, Duke, for your compliment, but I merely did my best to make the most suitable judgment." Edmund admired Lewis even more, patting him on the shoulder. "If every pioneer lord had your insight, there might be hope for the Northern Territory too." He casually picked up a steel seal and stamped it heavily on Louis's Pioneer Lord registration document, formally confirming Baron Louis's sovereignty over the territory. Louis accepted the document, his fingertips brushing over the frost halberd badge embedded in the steel seal. He appeared calm outwardly, but inwardly he was setting off fireworks. The land chosen based on the daily intelligence system couldn't possibly be an ordinary territory. If Edmund knew its true value, he would never let it easily fall into others' hands, but hold it firmly in his own. Based on the location selected by Louis, he successfully obtained 300 square kilometers of the Northern Territory. As his initial pioneering land, he named it Red Tide Territory. On one hand, it is because the Calvin clan's emblem is crimson red. On the other hand, it is to commemorate the homeland he can never return to again. In the eyes of Duke Edmund, this land was just relatively more livable compared to other regions in the Northern Territory. But in Louis's eyes, with his daily intelligence system, it was simply the Vatican of the Northern Territory, the homeland of the Emperor of Europe. Firstly, the rivers in the territory would welcome fish migration and spawning every spring and autumn, providing a steady food source. Fish meat, high in calories and protein, could not only sustain the residents, but also supplement the soldiers' stamina. One might even anticipate the presence of magic fish like the northern crystal cod. Moreover, there is actually geothermal discharge in the territory, which is practically a miracle in the Northern Territory. Not only can it raise the surrounding soil temperature to grow some cold-resistant crops, but it can also help people survive the harshest of winters. This food, combined with fish meat, is sufficient to feed his residents, with some leftovers for sale. It is known that the most expensive thing in the Northern Territory is food. Plus, the geothermal discharge has brought about some small hot springs. When the cold winds of the Northern Territory cut through to the bone, and others are shivering with cold, he can soak in the hot springs and drink hot soup. Just thinking about it is delightful. However, what truly made his heart race was the mineral resources of this territory. Common cold iron ore is nothing to talk about. It's not rare in the Northern Territory and is an essential material for forging weapons and armor. But a hidden magic marrow vein lay undiscovered on the edge of the territory. Demon marrow, similar to sulfur in his previous life, is a key material for making explosives and is highly sought after by alchemists. Of course, he currently lacks the capital to mine it, and he is still very weak, easily coveted by others. One day he will use this thing to shock the entire world. Magic gunpowder blasting nights, how thrilling! With rich food resources, warm geothermal energy, or veins and demon marrow. This place is simply a godsend, not something that should appear in the Northern Territory. And his intuition told him that the potential of Red Tide Territory goes far beyond this. Seeing Louis holding his pioneering certificate, still in a daze with a faint smile on his lips, Duke Edmund couldn't help but tease, "Shall I keep you for a meal?" Only then did Louis snap out of his euphoria, lightly clear his throat, and compose himself. He had one more thing to do before leaving. He raised his hand, signaling his knights to bring into chests. When the first chest was opened, 3 live northern crystal cod leaped into view, their silvery scales shimmering faintly under the firelight. Duke Edmund's eyes suddenly lit up. Northern crystal cod, a rare item that even he, the governor of the north, found hard to acquire. And this young man brought 3 at once. Not only is its meat delicious, but more importantly, its bone essence can enhance a knight's physique and vitality, especially suitable for knights at a bottleneck. And it so happened that his daughter was stuck at the initial stage of being an elite knight, and with the help of this northern crystal cod, her chances of success would undoubtedly increase significantly. However, before he could speak, Louis smiled and said, "Consider these 3 fish as my gift to the Duke." Duke Edmund was slightly stunned, then looked at the young man with a complex expression. Such a precious thing, just giving it away. Was this young man really that generous? Even for himself, resources of such caliber are hard to come by, let alone given away casually. But before the Duke could think further, Louis opened the second chest. Inside were another 3 northern crystal cod. This time Louis grinned. "These 3 are for trade." Crafty youngster. Duke Edmund finally couldn't help but laugh, nodding in appreciation. "Speak. What do you want?" Louis didn't hesitate to say, "I need people, slaves, soldiers, craftsmen, and knights." When he heard this, Edmund was completely convinced of one thing. This young man was not here to muddle through and wait to die in the Northern Territory. He really wanted to expand and establish his own power in this harsh land. A hint of laughter flashed in Edmund's eyes. How many do you want? The more, the better, of course. I won't let Duke suffer a loss. Louis slightly smiled. Ha, you drive a hard bargain. Slaves you can buy from the slave market yourself. I can give you 50 soldiers. 150. Louis held up a finger. Too greedy. Edmund shook his head. At most, 120. I happen to have a batch of recruits who haven't finished training yet. Older soldiers are impossible to give you. 30 craftsmen. No more unless I open a charity. Louis sighed, nodding. All right, what about knights? Preferably official knights. Edmund snorted. Official knights, dream on. Louis then asked, what about apprentice knights? The Duke's fingers paused, his gaze contemplative for a moment before he finally spoke. 10 apprentice knights, 3 official knights, under your command but loyal to the Northern Territory. Louis's lips curled up, extending his hand. Deal. Edmund glanced at him, smiling as he shook hands. Crafty youngster, don't die too soon. After bargaining, Louis successfully exchanged 6 Northern Crystal Cod for the talents he most needed. Looking at the list in front of him, Louis's lips slightly curled. Soldiers, though not rigorously trained, were at least usable. With some honing, they could form a competent garrison. Craftsmen, although not many, were enough to build houses, roads, and basic infrastructure, laying the foundation for Red Tide territory. And 10 apprentice knights, 3 official knights, greatly bolstered his knight team. Louis thought the deal was more successful than expected. Duke Edmund was more generous than he had imagined. In any case, he had gotten what he needed most. After signing the territory contract, Elmond glanced up at Louis still standing there, lips slightly curling. The deal is done. Why are you still here, waiting for me to throw you a farewell banquet? Louis laughed, turned to leave. However, Edmund suddenly paused, speaking meaningfully. You'd better check out the slave market and buy some slaves, otherwise, given the current state of your territory, relying on refugees alone won't be enough. Louis raised an eyebrow. Even without the reminder, he would have gone. After all, 2 talents were waiting for him at the slave market. Edmund instructed the official standing by, take him over there, and tell those profiteers not to slaughter him like a fat sheep. Yes, my lord. The official bowed slightly, then gestured to Louis to proceed. Louis thanked him. Thank you for your goodwill, Duke. The Duke waved his hand as a gesture of farewell. The eastern marketplace of Frost Halberd City, where the cold wind howled. The air was filled with the stench of animal hides, the aroma of roasting meat, and the crisp sound of metal clashing. The stalls lining the streets were extremely rudimentary, mostly just a few wooden poles propping up a shed, with goods casually displayed. Originally, this was just a small trading market, occasionally visited by farmers and hunters to exchange for grain and daily necessities. But since the Northern Territory Pioneer Order was issued, many merchants smelled the scent of gold coins and flocked here like ravenous wolves, forcibly transforming this small market into a bustling trade center. At the easternmost side of the market, a rough wooden fence enclosed an open space, inside of which stood a group of ragged slaves. Most of them shrank their bodies, with heads lowered, as if accustomed to becoming someone else's commodity. Occasionally, a defiant look of anger could be seen, but whenever the slave merchant's whip cracked down 10 times in a row, all rebellious spirit would instantly be quenched. Although the slave market was a gray area within the empire, in the chaotic Northern Territory, it was practically an open secret. Whether pioneer lords or smugglers, everyone knew what was most lacking here: manpower. Come and see, young and robust laborers, skilled in mining, logging, brick carrying, and cotton picking, more capable than oxen. These are captives from the snow country. Though not fully tamed yet, they're cheap. Buy them back and train them for a few months. They'll surely be obedient. Looking for smarter slaves. These are literate and can even help manage accounts. Various hawkers' cries rang out endlessly as the slave merchants expertly promoted their wares. To them, these slaves were essentially no different from horses and goods. A slave merchant noticed Louis and his entourage and immediately put on a flattering smile and greeted them. Sirs, come take a look. These are the best laborers in the Northern Territory, guaranteed to work hard, withstand cold and hunger, and absolutely affordable. The official accompanying Louis frowned and reminded the slave merchant, "This is Baron Calvin. Weigh your actions carefully. Don't get any wrong ideas." "Of course not." The slave merchant waved his hands repeatedly, smiling even more warmly. "My business is fair to all, young and old alike, and the prices are quite reasonable. These slaves, each is a hard worker, adept at farming, chopping wood, building houses, and picking cotton. There's nothing they can't do." He waved his big hand, signaling for the slaves behind him to stand straight. Some slaves reflexively straightened their backs, but more just stood numbly, lifeless. "Look at these, strong and muscular young men. They have the strength of two oxen." The slave merchant walked to a few dark-skinned slaves and patted their shoulders. "Though they seem skinny, they eat little and do much. Just give them a mouthful to eat, and they'll work for you till dusk without a word of complaint." He lowered his voice, revealing a suggestive smile. "Of course, if you have other interests, we can also provide higher quality goods here. From the south, fair-skinned, all meticulously trained, guaranteed to satisfy you." Lewis's eyebrows twitched slightly with a frown. "Not needed." The slave merchant, seeing this, immediately switched back to a professional smile, nodding repeatedly. "You're indeed a man of vision. Now is the time to make use of people in the Northern Territory's expansion. These rough serfs are the most practical trades. Rest assured, these slaves of mine are not only hard-working, but also obedient. They won't cause you trouble." Lewis scanned the slaves before him. These people were in tattered clothes, with pale skin, many with faces full of numbness. Although the slave merchant boasted they were strong and capable, in reality, most were malnourished, and some could barely stand due to weak legs. However, among slaves, their appearance was indeed considered relatively good. His gaze slowly swept over the group of slaves and finally settled on a small, thin boy. The boy was tightly curled in a woman's arms, his frail body trembling like a scared little animal. But in Lewis's eyes, his status was far from an ordinary slave. This was a system-indicated target, with the potential of a peak knight. This timid demeanor makes it hard to imagine that without the intelligence system's prompt, this boy might grow into a peak knight and become a key player in a future war. Elsewhere in the slave group, a man thinner than the rest was hunched slightly, seemingly trying to disappear entirely into the crowd. His face was hidden under disheveled gray hair, his eyes darting, always deliberately avoiding the gaze of the people around him. He looked completely unremarkable, even more downtrodden than the other slaves. For an ordinary person, he might seem like nothing more than a pitiable wretch close to collapse. But Lewis knew. This was Hilko, the alchemy apprentice who fled north after being hunted for theft. The slave merchant, noticing Lewis's growing interest, patted his chest in assurance. "Sir, if you buy them, I guarantee you won't be disappointed." Lewis didn't rush his decision and instead asked, "How much for one slave?" "Men are 8 silver coins, women and children for silver coins," the slave merchant said with a smile. Lewis nodded. The prices of these slaves weren't low, but not exorbitant either. It seemed the slave merchant was wary of the official beside him and didn't dare to go too far. "How many people do you have here?" "There are over 380 here, and we can bring in more from outside if needed." "These will do," Lewis decisively commanded. He then went to several other slave merchants, gradually purchasing 120 more people. In total, he gathered 500 slaves, spending 380 gold coins in all. This single transaction nearly halved his assets. Currency system: 10 iron coins equal to 1 copper coin, 10 copper coins equal to 1 silver coin, 10 silver coins equal to 1 gold coin. Next, Lewis purchased large quantities of grain, seeds, farm tools, weapons, and other necessities for pioneering his territory. The prices in the Northern Territory were at least twice as high as in the South, further tightening his financial situation. After completing all the purchases, he counted his remaining assets and found only 68 gold coins left. Broke. During the 2 days in Frost Halberd City, Lewis not only busied himself with procuring supplies, but also met a few noble lords, sent for expansion, like himself. After brief interactions, he lost interest in these so-called nobles. Some spent their days drowning in taverns, escaping reality. Others wore dismal expressions, filled with despair about the future. In front of Lewis, they'd curse the emperor's incompetence, denounce their parents' heartlessness, wishing they could flee back south immediately. Lewis merely smiled non-committally at this and stopped engaging with these people. 2 days later, outside the gates of Frost Halberd City, a nearly 1,000-strong contingent was fully prepared. Lewis mounted his horse and gazed into the distance. There lay Red Tide Territory, his domain. Set off. With a command, the procession began its grand journey, heading towards the northeastern part of the Northern Territory, to the Red Tide Territory. A row of simple large pots were set up on burning firewood, and the air was filled with the faint aroma of wheat porridge. The slaves lined up in a long queue, holding rough wooden bowls, waiting for the porridge to be distributed. Their eyes were full of gratitude, as they had been struggling with hunger in the past days. Even a bit of leftovers would be fought over, so having hot porridge to drink now was a great blessing. Lord Lewis's kindness is never ending. Standing behind the stove, George muttered worriedly while ladling porridge with a large wooden spoon. "Lord, if you keep cooking like this, I'm afraid the food will run out. If one day the gap is too big, we might." His words were interrupted by Lewis with a casual wave of his hand. "When you're hungry, you need to eat. Just cook as told. Why so much useless talk?" George opened his mouth but ended up sighing, resigned to continue ladling porridge. This new master of his was great in every way, except that he was too generous, hardly caring about food at all. HMPH, at this rate, in less than half a year, I might end up back in the slave market. George felt a pang of sadness. If that's the case, he'd better steal 2 more bowls of porridge now, lest he should go hungry someday unexpectedly. But Lewis was completely unconcerned about this. He wasn't worried about running out of food. The resources of Red Tide territory were so abundant that one couldn't possibly starve. This was the confidence his golden finger brought him. Just in time, today's daily intelligence was updated. 1. Baron Hayes of Expansion died of freezing due to excessive drinking on his way to the territory. 2. The governor of the North's youngest daughter, Emily Edmond, broke through to a junior elite knight. 3. A pack of 70 hungry ice wolves, following the scent of food, are lurking in the gorge ahead, ready to attack the convoy. The first 2 pieces of information were inconsequential to Lewis, at most feeling a bit of regret for Baron Hayes's death. The third piece, however, made his expression serious. Even with his current military strength, there was nothing to fear from 70 ice wolves, but any carelessness leading to a surprise attack by these vicious beasts would result in unacceptable losses. He immediately summoned Knight Captain Lambert and ordered solemnly, "Let the knights form groups of 5 to scout around the gorge for any anomalies." Lambert nodded unhesitatingly and took the command. The knights quickly formed groups and galloped towards the gorge. The cold wind howled, and an eerie chill permeated the gorge. The night team moved slowly along the snow, where the air was filled with an unpleasant, fishy odor. It was like the smell of rotting flesh mixed with the scent of wild animals, making people instinctively frown. Lambert dismounted, crouched in the snow, and used his hand to brush away the thin snow, revealing the chaotic paw prints below. The deep impressions indicated the wolves were extremely hungry, lacking the patience to cover their tracks. He lifted his head, his expression grave. "There's something up." They quickly returned to Lewis's side, reporting their findings in detail. After listening, Lewis showed no signs of panic. "Very well, since they've come to us, let them see who the real prey is." He immediately ordered traps to be set up in the gorge to lure the wolf pack into them. The hungry ice wolves lurked in the snow, their ghostly green eyes fixed on the distant convoy. Their fur was thick and rough, the color a blend of gray-white and dark blue, making it easy for them to blend into the icy wasteland. Hunger made their bodies appear even more emaciated, yet the terrifying explosive power hidden beneath their bones was still evident. An enticing aroma wafted through the wind, the scent of their long-desired prey. Owl, the leading wolf king, let out a low growl. Dozens of black shadows instantly sprang from the snow, stealthily and silently advancing toward the convoy like ghosts. Closer and closer, closer and closer. Bang! The dull sound of an explosion shattered the night, as a giant wooden stake mechanism suddenly sprang up, spearing through several leading wolves, dyeing the snow red with blood instantly. The wolf pack, shocked by the sudden trap, scattered in panic. The soldiers ambushed in the periphery quickly drew their bows and rained arrows down like a storm. Swish, swish, swish. The sound of arrows tearing through the air ripped the atmosphere, and the ice wolves, unable to dodge, cried out miserably as several were pierced through the throat, collapsing in the snow, their blood swiftly reddening the white snow. "Now attack!" Lambert's long sword cut a silver arc through the air. The knights launched a simultaneous assault, their raging fighting energy igniting the battlefield in an instant. A knight suddenly leapt up, the war spear in his hand glowing with red light, violently impaling an oncoming ice wolf. The explosive energy nailed the wolf's carcass to the snow, blasting open a massive crack. Another knight wielded a heavy sword, the blade entangled with crimson fighting energy flames. He leaped high, slashing down, the flames cleaving the knight as he cleaved a giant wolf attempting an ambush in half. Warm blood bloomed on the snow like crimson flowers. The wolf pack's wild nature could no longer suppress the fear in their hearts, scattering in flight. Close the net. The knights adjusted their formation, encircling the wolf pack. They wielded their fighting energy, every slash taking a wolf's life. Amidst the sounds of blades slicing through flesh, the wolf pack was completely slaughtered, leaving only deathly howls behind. Finally, only the Wolf King remained standing alone on the blood-stained snowfield, its thick fur soaked with blood, its ghostly green eyes fixed fiercely on Lambert, showing a final ferocity. Arwa! The Wolf King roared angrily, its massive body lunged at Lambert, its claws slicing through the air with a chilling force, enough to tear through steel. But Lambert merely sidestepped. The light blade condensed from fighting energy instantly covered his long sword. Red light surging. Slash! With a low growl, the sword light fell like thunder, directly separating the Wolf King's head from its body. Hot blood sprayed as the wolf's corpse collapsed heavily to the ground. The battle ended even faster than expected. With the Night Order virtually unscathed, the ground was littered with the corpses of ice wolves. The bloodied snow a testament to the battle's brutality. Lambert didn't even catch his breath, turning to look at Lewis approaching on horseback from afar. My lord, the wolf pack is annihilated. The knights soon tallied the results, a complete annihilation of 70 ice wolves. The spoils were also quite substantial. 70 thick wolf pelts, sharp wolf teeth, and most importantly, mounds of wolf meat. Lewis looked at the spoils and nodded in satisfaction. Well done. Skin the wolves and distribute the meat among the brothers as an extra meal. The soldiers burst into cheers. In the cold northern territory, a hot meal of meat was a dream come true. Moreover, wolf meat was not inedible. When properly prepared, it could taste no worse than ordinary game. The Lord is truly generous. At that moment, the new recruits looked at Lewis with eyes that shifted from mere obedience to genuine admiration. After several days of travel, Lewis finally arrived at the Red Tide territory with his convoy. However, what met his eyes was a desolate wilderness. What a god-forsaken place. A knight from the south muttered as he looked at the scene before him. Lewis didn't respond. Instead, he dismounted slowly and observed his surroundings. Barren, dilapidated, lifeless, the entire land was deathly silent, with barely even a sign of weeds. Truly a desolate place. But with his intelligence system, Lewis was very sure that this land held great potential, with many resources, geothermal, mineral deposits, fishery, and large tracts of land suitable for farming. If someone is willing to develop it, this place will surely become a land of wealth. This place will eventually become the richest territory in the Northern Territory. Lewis murmured softly, as if promising himself. Without wasting time, Lewis began giving expansion orders. First, set up temporary tents. Then once the living area is confirmed, start building houses. We can start by cutting wood to prepare. Find a water source by the river. Ensure everyone has sufficient drinking water and food supplies. Clear a plot of land for a simple training ground. The soldiers must not neglect their training. As orders were given, the soldiers and slaves quickly sprang into action. The sounds of logging and shouts filled the air, echoing across this long silent land, imparting its first flicker of life. As the newly appointed Lord of Red Tide Territory, Lewis needed to personally confirm the state of this land to draft the ensuing development plans. Thus, he spent the next few days carefully surveying the entire Red Tide Territory. When Lewis reached the southern part of the territory, he discovered areas where snow had melted, slowly emitting steam. He hurried forward, crouched down, and felt a trace of warmth with his palm. Is it a geothermal vent? Lewis's eyes flashed with delight. The intelligence system had hinted at geothermal resources here, and it turned out to be true. In an environment like the Northern Territory, geothermal resources are indeed extremely valuable wealth. If developed properly, not only could it provide warmth for the residents, but it could also facilitate the coming spring planting. More surprising, he discovered a few hot springs nearby. Hot springs and the Northern Territory. These two words together seemed almost unbelievable. Imagining himself soaking in a hot spring, while other lords shivered in the cold, Lewis couldn't help but smile. The feeling was simply doubly joyful, so he decided to place his manor near the hot springs. He then went to the riverside, where the ice had already cracked, and the river water flowed slowly. A few birds rested on the riverbank, occasionally diving into the water to catch small fish that hadn't yet awakened. The fish population in the river wasn't abundant at the moment, but according to the intelligence system's reports, when spring arrives, this place will become a breeding ground for fish, providing a stable food source for the territory. Just as he was pondering how to maximize the use of this resource, a squad of scout knights that Lewis had sent out hurried back with exciting intelligence. They discovered abundant mineral deposits deep within the mountains. Lord, in the northwest mountains, we discovered a cold iron vein. Moreover, deeper in, we found a mineral emitting a dark red glow, suspected to be demon marrow ore. Lambert gasped, demon marrow ore, if it's true, that's a gold mine. Lewis nodded calmly. He had long known about the existence of this vein through his intelligence system, so he wasn't too surprised. The value of demon marrow ore needs no elaboration, but given the current conditions, attempting to mine it is too difficult. However, as long as this land can develop steadily, this vein will eventually become Red Tide Territory's most significant asset. After this round, Lewis and his knights felt more confident about this land. The intelligence system was right. This is indeed a land full of promise. However, compared to the potential value of this land, the current reality is very harsh. When they entered the native settlement, they were greeted by a scene of utter ruin. The stagnant water on the land mixed with decaying mud, filling the air with a damp, rotting odor. Crude wooden shacks and mud huts stood crookedly, looking as if they could collapse any moment. Most of the residents were poorly clothed elders, women, and children. They were thin, wrapped in clothes barely held together by old strips of cloth, clearly inadequate against the cold of the Northern Territory. Was there anyone managing this place before? Lewis frowned at the sight. The former governor ran off long ago, an indigenous resident answered. A few frail children huddled behind a door, their cheeks reddened by the cold, hiding their thin bodies in the shadows, watching Lewis's group. Their eyes were timid, full of wariness and fear towards strangers. Seeing this, Lewis felt uneasy. Having gone through compulsory education, he couldn't bear to see children suffering like this. He dismounted and took some rations from his pocket, walked forward, crouched down, and offered the food. Take this and eat. But the children only stared at him warily. None dared to take it, seemingly afraid it was some kind of trap. However, the aroma of the rations was extraordinarily tempting in the air, and the children swallowed salivatingly. Go ahead and eat, Lewis said softly. The children finally couldn't resist, grabbing the food from Lewis's hands, devouring it hungrily, fearing it might disappear the next second. But Lewis soon noticed a little boy who didn't immediately devour his share as the others did. Instead, he quietly hid his portion in his worn clothing. Why aren't you eating? Lewis squatted down to ask. The little boy looked up, his dirty face full of fear. He replied in a timid voice, I'm saving it to eat with Mom. Lewis was taken aback. He suddenly remembered. In the South, the nobility fed their dogs the best meat. Yet here, the children had to hide away even a piece of dry food cautiously. It was absurd. He suddenly felt a sense of responsibility, the desire to do something for the people and this land. So Lewis looked around at the cold and hungry natives and loudly announced, all who are willing to work can come to my station. I will provide you with food, shelter, and a chance to survive. The natives looked at each other, their eyes full of numbness. They had suffered too much and no longer believed in anyone. But seeing these children who had just received food, they eventually nodded. Let's give it a try. After all, nothing could be worse than their current situation. Lewis stood on a slightly elevated hill, overlooking this desolate land. The place he was looking at was the initial settlement he had chosen for the Red Tide Territory, the future central town of the territory. This location was near a geothermal vent, meaning higher temperatures, enough to prevent people from freezing to death at night. The hill blocked the bitter cold wind, just enough to provide some shelter for these newly arrived residents. Lord, is it time to start building the castle? Mike, standing beside him, asked. Mike was the most experienced among the craftsmen Lewis acquired from Duke Edmund. Lewis appointed him as the building officer of the Red Tide Territory. No rush for the castle. Lewis shook his head. First, let's build the residential area. Where will you live then? Just live with everyone else for now. You want to live with us? The old craftsman was taken aback. What, are you worried I can't get used to it? Lewis shrugged indifferently. We're in the Northern Territory. What does it matter? The old craftsman suddenly saw the young lord in a new light. So, after discussing with Lewis, they decided on a type of semi-pit collective dwelling as the initial housing for the Red Tide Territory. It was a combination of typical Northern Territory dwellings of this world and Viking longhouses Lewis had seen in books from his previous life. This house was dug to 1/3 below the ground surface, lower than the terrain, effectively insulating The walls were supported with a wooden framework, woven with willow twigs on the outside, and finally plastered with grass mud for reinforcement, both windproof and moisture-resistant. Most importantly, the construction speed was extremely fast. A brief exchange with Lewis filled Mike with admiration. This young lord had, in such a short time, designed such a building perfectly suited for the Northern Territory, a true architectural genius. After the design was completed, construction immediately commenced. Teams of 20, led by 2 soldiers and consisting of 18 slaves or refugees, advanced efficiently with clear division of labor. As the cold wind howled, the slaves hunched their shoulders, gripping their rough iron spades tightly, and struck the permafrost hard. Thud, the spade shook their wrists numb, but finally, the soil loosened a bit. "Don't just stand there, keep going," the soldier urged. As they sweated profusely, a figure walked into the pit. It was Lewis. He rolled up his sleeves, picked up a shovel himself, and dug for a while. "The Lord also wants to work personally." Everyone was surprised. This work is really not easy. You all have worked hard. Dinner time is soon. You can take a break." Lewis dug for over 10 minutes, remarking with a thoughtful sigh. Then he turned to the next construction site, continuing his tour of working alongside the people. Initially, some soldiers were dissatisfied, feeling they were clearly a combat unit, yet were sent to build houses, doing the work of laborers. But now that even the Lord was personally getting hands-on, what more could they complain about? The slaves felt even more so. Many of them had issues sustaining themselves. Now not only did they have food, but also a fixed place to live, which was already an enormous blessing. Between building houses, Lewis would occasionally pass by a construction site, casually lend a hand a few times, leave some encouraging words, then dust off his hands and move on. "This framework is set nicely. You can sleep well tonight. Plaster the mud a little thicker. Don't slack off, otherwise you'll freeze. Is this side almost done? I'll send over some hot soup. Once you finish this batch, you can rest." Wherever Lewis went, the motivation there increased several folds. With the addition of sufficient food supplies, the soldiers no longer complained. The slaves worked as if their lives depended on it. Their morale boosted to the max, and the entire territory's construction speed was astonishingly quick. In just a few days, the first batch of semi-pit collective dwellings emerged from the ground, like mounds rising from the earth, thick grass mud covering the roofs, blending with the snowfield. The houses were mostly buried underground, with sturdy and heavy frameworks supported by logs. The outer walls woven with willow twigs and solidified with rammed earth, saving timber while insulating against cold. Moreover, the entire residential area was built around the geothermal vent, capable of dissipating most of the cold air. Though they appeared simple, they could be considered one of the best living environments in the Northern Territory. With the completion of the first batch of semi-pit dwellings, the Red Tide Territory finally established a real foundation in this cold Northern Territory. Of course, mere houses were not enough. The human heart was the most crucial. To motivate the people of the territory and further establish his benevolent and wise Lord image, Lewis decided to host a grand celebration. He wanted to make it clear to everyone that following him, Lewis, they wouldn't suffer any losses. As night fell, a giant bonfire was lit on the open ground in front of the Red Tide Territory, dispelling the cold of the Northern Territory. This piece of open ground, once barren permafrost, had now become lively for the first time due to the arrival of the celebration. Nearly 1,000 residents gathered under the firelight. They had different identities, from slaves bought from slave traders, to indigenous people of the Northern Territory, refugees taken in along the way, and soldiers and knights who had followed Lewis. But at this moment, they shared one commonality. They were all citizens of the Red Tide Territory. The crowd's gaze instinctively turned to the high stone before the bonfire. Standing there was their Lord Lewis Calvin. The young Baron of Expansion wore a black long cloak, his face flickering in the firelight, no one knowing what he was going to do. When everyone had gathered, Lewis finally spoke. "Today is the first celebration in the Red Tide Territory, to celebrate the completion of the first batch of houses in the Red Tide Territory. With houses, this land will become your home, and you will become the true masters of the Red Tide Territory." However, there was no reaction from the crowd below. They just looked at each other, even a bit bewildered. What does it mean to become a master? These slaves, refugees, and laborers had never thought they could become masters of any land. They only knew work. They only knew obedience. Even the courage to resist had been worn away in their long suffering. Initially, They thought this celebration was some kind of oath by the new lord, or some kind of intimidation. Louis had anticipated this reaction long ago, but it didn't matter. He would show them what hope was through practical actions. Next, Louis glanced over the crowd. I want to reward those who are most diligent and loyal. He raised a hand, and the steward Hilko behind him immediately unfolded the parchment in his hands and began reading a long list of names. Huck, Morgan, Sharna. The slaves whose names were called all flinched, showing fearful expressions. In their past understanding, being named by the Lord usually meant punishment, or even death. Some had already started trembling, some lowered their heads, and some even wanted to kneel down and beg for mercy. They had no idea how their fate was about to change. The slaves whose names were called hesitated as they stepped forward, their hearts filled with unease. Louis waited until they were settled before slowly beginning to speak. In the days past, you have made great efforts for the construction of the Red Tide territory. So today I will give you the reward you deserve, without unnecessary words. Louis directly reached out to take the slave contracts from Hilko's hand and threw them into the bonfire. The flames devoured the words that represented the slaves' identities. From today onwards, you are no longer slaves, but free men. Everyone was stunned, their breaths caught for a moment. Freedom. The slaves looked at each other in disbelief, their eyes full of shock, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing and hearing. The next second, the crowd erupted completely. Free men. We're free men now. Great Lord. Oh my God, free men. I'm a free man now. A middle-aged slave, his face weathered and worn, suddenly threw himself to the ground, his forehead continuously hitting the hard permafrost. Even when it bled, he did not stop. His voice was hoarse and broken due to excessive excitement. Great Lord, benefactor. Great Lord, you are the Savior sent by God. A young female slave covered her face, crying, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Another elderly slave trembled as he raised his hands, mumbling softly. It looked like he was praying to the dragon ancestor, and also like he was offering his most pious gratitude to Louis. And the other slaves around them widened their eyes, watching those kneeling on the ground in shock. They felt extremely regretful, thinking why they hadn't worked a bit harder. Maybe they could have become free men at this moment. When the scene quieted down a bit, Louis dropped another bombshell. From today onwards, every month, more than 10 slaves who contribute to the Red Tide territory will become free men. As long as you are willing to work hard and contribute to the Red Tide territory, each of you has the opportunity to become free men and even own your own land. The entire group of slaves looked at Louis, collectively incredulous. If the liberation of that first group gave them a glimpse of hope, then now Louis gave them a real future. As slaves, they were merely Louis' property, with their lives and deaths decided at will, and their children and grandchildren were still slaves, unable to break free for generations. But now Louis told them that as long as they worked hard, they had the chance to escape their slave status and become truly free people. This meant stepping from hell into the human world for them. A few clever slaves knelt on the ground, shouting, "Great Master." Soon more followed, the voices rising and falling, sweeping across the entire square like a tide. Their voices were hoarse and trembling, filled with uncontrollable fervor. "Great Master, Great Master." Their voices grew louder and more synchronized, finally converging into a deafening chorus. It was like a cry bursting forth from the depths of their souls, echoing under the night sky, lingering for a long time. "Great Master." The knights standing nearby watched the scene, exchanging glances. Though they had witnessed many miracles from the Lord before, this scene still left them utterly astonished. A few words from a single man had turned a group of numb-walking corpses into fervent followers. Some young knights were even a bit at a loss. Why did these lowly slaves now gaze upon Louis as if they were worshipping a deity? Standing atop the high rock, Louis was full of emotion. Merely a promise had such power. As an heir, he naturally didn't agree with the institution of slavery. The slave system had to be abolished, but it had to be done gradually. He feared that absolute freedom granted too quickly would cause chaos. By utilizing a reward system for gradual emancipation, the slaves could stay motivated, allowing the Red Tide territory to develop swiftly. In the Red Tide territory, the difference between slaves and free men wasn't that significant. At that time, free men's harvest still had to be handed over to Louis for unified distribution. However, by dividing the two classes and providing prospects for advancement, their enthusiasm could be easily harnessed. Of course, you're not left out. Louis shifted his gaze to the soldiers and knights standing in the outer circle. He raised his hand, and his attendants nimbly opened several heavy wooden chests. The light from the bonfire illuminated the sturdy armor, and warm boots neatly ranged inside the chests. At that moment, all the soldiers' eyes were inevitably drawn to the supplies inside the chests. Every soldier gets a set of beast hide armor and a pair of northern leather boots. Members of the Knight Order will additionally be rewarded with one complete wolf pelt, which can serve as an armor lining. As soon as the words fell, the soldiers immediately rushed towards the chests. This is the Northern Territory, where cold and poverty make resources exceptionally scarce. Many soldiers still wore worn-out boots, with their feet freezing numb while patrolling the ice and snow. A pair of new boots and fresh leather armor were things they had long dreamed of. The attendants distributed the thick leather armors to the soldiers one by one. Heavens, it's real leather armor. These boots, these are the finest leather boots in the Northern Territory. Lord, are you serious? They excitedly received the equipment, eyes full of excitement, hearts full of gratitude. Standing on the high stone, Louis looked at the soldiers below, overwhelmed with excitement, a slight smile on his lips. These armors and boots were pre-purchased in Frost Halberd City, originally meant to outfit the soldiers. In the Northern Territory, resources are scarce. Even the smallest favor can make people utterly loyal. Moreover, these rewards were things they desperately needed. As revealed by Louis' intelligence system, it was like striking at their most vulnerable point. How could they not be filled with gratitude? After distributing the items, the banquet continued, with several golden roasted prey being brought up. The hot juices dripped onto the flames, making a soft sizzle sound. The rich aroma of meat permeated the air, tantalizing everyone's taste buds. Everyone received a piece. Even the lowest-ranked slaves were fairly allotted a portion. When the first bite of the delicious roast entered their mouths, the long-lost warmth and satisfaction brought many to tears. It's so delicious. I haven't tasted real meat in years. Laughter and happiness echoed across the clearing as people danced around the bonfire. A refugee from the Northern Territory played a bone whistle excitedly, while several indigenous women held hands, spinning and leaping. The soldiers, not to be outdone, joined in humming and even started competing in dance steps around the bonfire, laughing. Children ran in groups across the clearing, their faces lit with pure joy, while Louis quietly overlooked the scene from the highest rock. As a lord, the people had already pinned their hopes on him. He must lead them to not only survive on this cold land, but also to prosper. Hilko has been so busy lately that he barely has time to catch his breath, all because Louis casually said, "Go register the basic information of the Red Tide Territory residents, and see what each of them is good at." So he was thrown into this pile of messy handwritten files, staring wide-eyed at a group of confused farmers and blacksmiths. Some people stammered, completely unsure of how to answer. "I used to farm. Do you still want to continue farming?" "I don't know." Others answered casually, "I'm good at staying alive." Hilko almost slapped the record book on that person's face at that moment. Damn it, how did I, a future alchemist, end up as a steward for a border lord? Hilko cursed under his breath while feverishly writing, copying name after name into the book. He could only blame his own itchy hands for stealing some alchemy's secret recipe. He was originally an alchemy apprentice who would steal his mentor's magic crystals to exchange for money, living an upper-class life in the Jade Federation. Until one day, he met a mysterious person in the black market who offered a hefty sum to specifically ask him to steal one of his mentor's alchemy secret techniques, a price that was tempting. Hilko didn't hesitate for long. After all, the payment was enough for him to break free from his apprenticeship and open his own alchemy workshop. However, the plan was far less smooth than he had imagined. The secret recipe was too profound for him to memorize, so he simply took the entire thing. Anyway, his mentor was forgetful, and missing one recipe wouldn't be noticed. But he underestimated the importance of this secret recipe. His mentor quickly discovered the loss, and the Golden Marrow Guild issued a warrant, vowing to bring the thief to justice. The black market buyer was quickly caught and confessed about him. Hilko knew that once captured, he would not only face harsh punishment, but might even be sent to a lab to become a guinea pig for bizarre alchemy experiments. So to save his life, he cleverly disguised himself as a slave, mingling among those transported by slave merchants, hoping to escape the Jade Federation and find a chance to get away later. But these slave merchants were more cunning than he expected. Whenever he tried anything sneaky, he was met with a long whip, leaving him no room to resist. After tens of lashes, he became obedient. Thus he indeed became an ordinary slave, and he didn't dare reveal his identity as an alchemy apprentice. If the slave merchants knew, they would happily resell him to the Golden Marrow Guild, and Hilko would be sent straight to a lab table. So, after going around in circles, he was taken to the black market of Frost Halberd City. He thought he would be sold to a mine to dig for the rest of his life. Who knew a young pioneer lord named Lewis would buy him and take him to this godforsaken territory? Initially, Hilko thought he might have escaped purgatory only to fall into another pit, to be enslaved until death. However, Lewis didn't treat slaves like livestock as other nobility did. Instead, upon learning that he could write and manage accounts, he revoked his slave status and made him an assistant similar to a steward. During his time observing and interacting with Lewis, he discovered something. Lewis was a good person. He would share his food with those starving slaves and even personally tore up the slave contracts, granting them freedom. A noble who actually treated slaves as humans. In Hilko's eyes, this didn't seem like a competent lord, but more like a religious follower. Guess I'm lucky this once. Though Hilko said that, he constantly plotted his escape. After all, how could a future great alchemist spend his life in this godforsaken place? Master, this is the citizen survey you asked me to do. Hilko placed a thick book on Lewis's desk. His face showed deep fatigue. His steps were somewhat unsteady. Thank you for your hard work. Lewis took the book and casually flipped through it. The handwriting wasn't exactly neat, but it was clear in arrangement and categorized meticulously. Even the elderly who could barely lift a hoe, the women who could weave, and even the children who were good at hunting were noted, showing obvious effort in tidying up. A talent, indeed. Lewis looked up at the young man in front of him. Hilko stood sloppily, with deep dark circles under his eyes. He, too, knew that Hilko wasn't an ordinary person at all. After all, his daily intelligence system is not just for show. He knew from the moment he bought Hilko that the kid was an alchemy apprentice from the Jade Federation's Golden Marrow Guild, and also a criminal. However, he didn't expose him. On the one hand, Hilko seemed harmless. Lewis wasn't in a hurry to reveal him, wanting to see when he would willingly speak up. On the other hand, given the current situation of Red Tide territory, an assistant who could read and had administrative skills was more useful than an alchemy apprentice. The territory was still in its developmental stage. Forget alchemy. Even basic infrastructure wasn't fully established yet. The priority now was to make this land function normally, not to conduct alchemy experiments. If he directly exposed him, what if this guy decided to slack and stopped doing chores? Lewis glanced at the pile of documents and ledgers stacked behind him like a mountain. If he lost Hilko, this new lord might have to personally chew through this pile of junk himself. With this thought, Lewis decided to continue playing dumb. After all, in this remote area, the other party wouldn't be able to run away. Putting Hilko's matters aside, Lewis opened the survey book in his hand and quickly scanned the basic situation of the residents. Seeing the results, he couldn't help but smile slightly. Although Red Tide territory seemed like a barren wilderness, in reality, its talent pool was richer than Lewis imagined. With over 1,000 people, the majority engaged in agriculture and animal husbandry, and over 100 experienced fishermen, there were dozens of hunters, blacksmiths, carpenters, and tanners, enough to build a basic self-sufficient territory. This was exactly the information Lewis needed. He had Hilko conduct a population survey, not just for mere record keeping, but to understand the fabric of this territory. A territory is like a precision machine, where every gear needs to be placed in the right position to operate efficiently. If you arbitrarily let a farmer forge iron, or a fisherman dig canals, or a hunter herd sheep, while it might operate, it would certainly be slow. If a lord doesn't understand his people, he can't control the future of this land. The next step was to reasonably allocate these people, to get the Red Tide territory on the right track as soon as possible. Lewis pressed his head, and the territory's information kept operating in his mind. He started to make future industry plans for the Red Tide territory, based on the existing information. After all, relying on the intelligence system and similar luck to support nearly 1,000 people is unrealistic. The Red Tide territory must have some stable industries. When the information was organized in his head, he raised his head and looked at Hilko. I'll speak, you take notes. Hilko forced himself to stay focused, nodding subconsciously. Send these 100 fishermen immediately to the riverbank. Lewis pointed at the winding river on the map with a pen. build temporary docks first, and prepare fishing boats in advance to prepare for fishery restoration. Though there are not many fish now, once the water temperature rises, large schools of fish will swim upstream to spawn. By then, the catch will become one of the most important food sources for the red tide territory. In the future, consider setting up aquaculture areas along the river. If we can successfully cultivate fish that adapt to cold waters, we can develop our own aquaculture industry instead of just relying on wild fishing. Got it. Hilko noted down the key points the Lord said. One by one, apart from the fishery, agriculture and animal husbandry cannot be neglected. At present, we have over 400 farmers, focusing on land reclamation. Lewis drew a line on the cold zone of the geothermal map with his finger. Hot spring water can be used to melt the frost, so prepare the irrigation system in advance. Although the soil here isn't very fertile, making good use of the geothermal zones won't make it much worse. The first batch of crops will be rye and potatoes, which are cold resistant and can grow on this land. Understood. As for animal husbandry, Lewis paused, recalling the livestock in the territory. The number of livestock in the territory is too low now. We can't rely on the existing cattle, sheep, and reindeer for large-scale breeding. I will arrange for people to go to Frost Halberd City to purchase more livestock and establish a dedicated husbandry area to develop animal husbandry. Understood. Hilko kept nodding, although exhausted, attentively taking down each instruction. Next, Lewis drew a circle in the forest area of the red tide territory on the map. We have over 50 experienced hunters, aside from daily hunting. They can also explore the forest's periphery incidentally. Don't let magical beasts get close, and don't let unknown forces infiltrate. Lastly, these artisans brought from Frost Halberd City, let the leather workers prioritize winter clothes, blacksmiths forge farm tools, and carpenters build houses. A workshop can be established to gather all the craftsmen together for collaboration, while recruiting apprentices to form a complete production chain. Lewis spoke quickly, each sentence seeming like a decision rehearsed countless times in his mind. Hilko originally had no fondness for the title Lord. His impression of the nobility was of hypocrites, arrogant, spouting righteousness while treating their subjects like livestock. The initial impression Lewis gave him was merely that of a kind-hearted person, but now he's beginning to change his view. This lord not only has a kind heart, but also knows how to utilize the resources at hand. This guy is quite capable. Hilko felt admiration rising, and so, as Lewis executed his plans one by one, the red tide territory officially began operating. The bonfire illuminated the busy figures of people. Cooking smoke rose spirally. Hunters prepared for action. Fishermen started repairing fishing boats, and the sound of hammers from the artisans echoed in the air. This long dormant land slowly awakened under Lewis's arrangements. Spring arrived quietly, but most of the northern territory was still covered with lingering snow, making it impossible to cultivate. However, the land under Lewis's feet was different. The soil was loose and moist, carrying the unique life aura of spring. This was thanks to Lewis directing hot spring water into the fields a week earlier, using geothermal energy to melt the permafrost. Now the soil, frozen for an entire winter, had finally become loose, and the originally non-arable wasteland was gradually exuberating with vibrant life. Is this really land from the Northern Territory? A farmer picked up a handful of soil, feeling the warm moisture, and couldn't help but exclaim. Those around him heard and also bent down to touch, their faces full of surprise and delight. The hot water really melted the permafrost. Who would have thought we could plant crops this early spring in the Northern Territory? Excited discussions rose among the fields. Of course, using hot spring water to melt permafrost was a temporary solution. Hot spring water has a high salt content, and repeated use might turn the soil into barren saline alkali land. Once conditions are matured, we would need to develop greenhouse cultivation. Standing beside Lewis was a middle-aged man whose clothes were stained with soil and dry grass. His name was Mike, the agricultural official of the Red Tide Territory. Mike was originally just one of the slaves, unassuming and not good with words. If not for the daily intelligence system, Lewis might never have noticed that among a group of slaves, there was one proficient in farming. He was innately talented in farming, possessing an almost instinctive intuition about soil, crops, and climate. When Lewis found Mike, announcing the freedom from his slave status, and appointed him as the agricultural official of the Red Tide Territory, Mike couldn't even believe his ears. It was something he never dared dream of. He was poor with words, not knowing how to express gratitude, so he silently put all his efforts into the fields. Today was the day to cultivate and fertilize the fields in the Red Tide territory. Mike grabbed a handful of moist soil, gently crushed it between his fingers, revealing a satisfied smile. He looked up at Lewis, his rough hands wiped on the corner of his clothes. "Sir, everything is ready." "In that case, let's start," Lewis nodded. "All units, start plowing," Mike commanded loudly. The command was quickly executed, with hundreds of farmers bending down to deeply insert the iron plows into the soil. So fluffy. There's even warmth in this soil. The softening of the soil surprised many farmers who had worked in the Northern Territory before. And all of this was due to Lewis's ingenious idea. The subjects' admiration for Lewis increased by another notch. Watching the farmers diligently tilling the land, Lewis asked, "Is the fertilizer prepared?" "It's all ready," Mike waved his hand to indicate. A dozen wooden carts slowly drove into the fields, loaded with dark-colored fertilizer emanating a strong and pungent smell. This was the special base fertilizer that Lewis ordered to be collected and made. When he first came to the territory, it was composed of human and animal manure, straw, fish entrails, and clod powder alchemy product. Human and animal manure and straw provided basic nutrients, and fish entrails were rich in organic matter, while the clod powder not only greatly improves fertility, but also effectively prevents pest infestation, giving the seeds a better growth environment after being sown. The intense smell of the fertilizer permeated the air, stinging people's noses. Some frowned, but no one complained. Even as the Lord, Lewis didn't show the slightest disdain. After all, they all knew that only these fertilizers could lead to a better harvest. The farmers orderly scattered the fertilizer into the plowed soil, then mixed it evenly with a hoe to allow the nutrients to fully permeate. "We can plant seeds in for days," Mike said with a satisfied expression, stepping on the soil. Lewis stood for a moment, confirmed everything was in order, then turned to leave. It wasn't that he was bothered by the pungent fertilizer smell, but his daily intelligence system had updated with 3 particularly useful pieces of information that required his attention. Lewis's eyes flickered slightly, staring at the 3 pieces of information emerging from the daily intelligence system. In front of him, 1. The chief of the Cold Moon tribe was poisoned and died, and the Cold Moon tribe has fallen into civil war. 2. There is a pack of ice wolves at the Cyan Rock Rift, mostly cubs. 3. 4 days later, Jack will be selling cranberry seeds in Frost Halberd City. Mixed among them are over a dozen Frost Blood Red berry seeds. Lewis raised an eyebrow. The system's intelligence usually contained a lot of irrelevant trivial information, but today, all 3 pieces of intelligence were valuable. Cold Moon Tribe. Lewis recalled the intelligence about this northern barbarian race tribe. The Cold Moon Tribe has always been one of the strong forces in the Northern Territory, renowned for its blood-boiling berserkers and archers. They have harassed the Iron Blood Empire's northern province many times, causing Duke Edmund to detest them bitterly. Now their chief died by poisoning. The tribe is bound to fall into chaos, and if the turmoil continues, it might even split. To the entire Northern Territory, this might be a forewarning of an impending storm, but for Lewis at the moment, this issue doesn't concern him directly. After all, he's just a small fry who is just starting out and doesn't yet have the means to influence the fate of the barbarians. The only thing he can do is strengthen his power as quickly as possible to prepare for future changes. Next up is the second piece of intelligence about the ice wolves at Cyan Rock Rift. Cubs, that's the key to this information. Ice wolves are top predators on the northern snowfield, with enormous bodies, incredible speed, and the ability to survive in extremely cold environments. More importantly, their keen sense of smell makes them the best choice for reconnaissance and combat. However, adult wolves are extremely difficult to tame and almost impossible for humans to control. But the cubs are different. If tamed from a young age, the Red Tide territory will have a unique combat force, the Wolf Riders. Lewis speculated that these cubs' parents were the ice wolves they hunted on their way to the Red Tide territory before. What a coincidence. "We'll set off tomorrow," Lewis murmured to himself. The last piece of intelligence made him laugh out loud. Frost Blood Red berry, an extremely rare mutated berry. It looks similar to ordinary cranberries, but the fruit is deep red, and its juice is thick and rich in magic power. Most crucially, it can enhance bloodline knights' fighting energy and promote cultivation growth. If this could be cultivated on a large scale, It would become the most precious specialty of the Red Tide territory. But Lewis realized a problem. Even if he rushed at full speed, he couldn't reach Frost Halberd City in 4 days. Being just 1 day late might let others get ahead of him, and the value of Frost Blood Redberry is too great. He must ensure they fall into his hands. Lewis couldn't take this risk. He made a decisive decision and immediately summoned Lambert and 2 other elite knights. Lambert is his guardian knight. If he leads the team this time, Lewis can rest assured. Lambert, Lewis said in a deep voice, his gaze solemn. You 3 must hurry to Frost Halberd City and arrive within 3 days. He paused for a moment, then continued to the east side of the market. There's a merchant named Jack. 4 days later, he'll be selling cranberry seeds. You must arrive 2 days early, stake out the market, and ensure you buy all his goods first. Lambert was slightly startled but immediately nodded firmly in acceptance. Understood, my lord. He was quite puzzled why the lord valued a few berry seeds so much, but he accepted the order without a word, because every decision Lewis made along the way had ultimately proven to be correct. Lewis suddenly thought that since they were going to Frost Halberd City, they might as well take care of a few other tasks. He took a piece of parchment from his desk and began writing a letter. The content was simple. 1. To report his safety. 2. To ask for gold coins. Even though he wasn't sure if his cold-blooded father would respond, it couldn't hurt to try. Even a small amount of funding could expedite the development of the Red Tide territory. After finishing, he sealed the letter, stamped it with his seal, and handed it to Lambert. Once you get to Frost Halberd City, give this letter to the head of our family business there and have them send it back as quickly as possible. Lambert took the letter, carefully stored it, and nodded in agreement. Understood. Make sure there are no mistakes, Lewis repeatedly urged. Understood. The 3 of them mounted their horses and galloped toward Frost Halberd City. The following morning, Lewis, accompanied by 5 elite hunters and 8 official knights, sped across the permafrost straight toward Cyan Rock Rift. Have you confirmed it? Lewis glanced at Edgar, the hunter leading the team. Edgar respectfully replied, as per your orders, we sent people to investigate last night. The wolf pack has lost its leader. Most are cubs and a few elderly female wolves hiding in the depths of the rift. It's a good opportunity. The goal of Lewis and his team was, of course, the ice wolf cubs. The group carefully approached the rift, the snow spotted with wolf paw prints and blood stains, as if a fierce battle had occurred just last night. Edgar pointed to a certain chaotic part of the snow. Look, these paw prints are messy, indicating there might have been infighting among the wolves. Without a leader, internal conflict among the wolves is natural. In a while, we'll split into 2 teams. One team will create a distraction to draw the adults' attention, while the other team will take the chance to enter the den and bring out the cubs. Lewis looked at the hunters and said slowly, let's move. The hunters scattered the fresh blood and remnants of prey they had prepared beforehand outside the cave, and tied the largest pieces to the back of the knights' horses. These were fresh deer meat and animal bones, mixed with a strong bloody scent to trigger the adult ice wolf's hunting instinct to the maximum. The air quickly filled with a strong smell of blood. Soon enough, deep growls sounded from the cave, with pairs of green glowing eyes opening in the dark. They're coming, Edgar whispered. 5 huge adult ice wolves slowly emerged from the cave, warily scanning their surroundings, growling low in their throats. Their gaze locked onto the distant prey remains, and their pace quickened towards it. The knights immediately spurred their horses, using ropes to drag the prey remains, guiding the wolf pack away from the cave. The leading wolf charged towards the knights, with the other adults following closely. This was, of course, a meticulously planned trap. As the adult wolves were lured away from the cubs, the knights abruptly jerked their reins and turned their horses around. Long swords gleamed with icy coldness, slicing downwards. Slash! The lead wolf didn't even have time to react before a sword pierced through its throat. The remaining adult wolves growled in anger, trying to fight back. Unfortunately, they were not facing ordinary hunters but official knights with fighting energy. The smell of blood pervaded the air, and the wolf pack fell one after another in a one-sided slaughter. Within just a few minutes, the knights eliminated all the adult wolves. When the knight easily killed the adult ice wolves, Lewis and his group had already swiftly infiltrated the den of the wolf pack. Light the fire, Lewis whispered. Several hunters immediately took out torches and gently lit them. The warm orange light illuminated the inside of the cave. The walls were rough, and the air was filled with the peculiar animal scent. Their eyes scanned the surroundings, quickly spotting their target deep within the cave. More than 20 ice wolf pups were huddled together, trembling. They weren't very large, with thick fur, their bodies pure white like frost, eyes filled with fear of humans. So many pups, a hunter whispered in surprise. Edgar licked his cracked lips, eyes burning with excitement. These little ones, once grown, would definitely be top hunters. A few of the pups let out a soft, but fierce growl towards the group, trying to warn the intruders. When you are weak, even anger seems adorable to others. The little guys have quite the temper, Edgar laughed. Come on, little ones, have some food. A hunter gently placed a piece of meat in front of the pups hiding in the crevices of the rock, deliberately stepping back to avoid appearing too threatening. The pieces of meat were specially coated with a herbal sedative. This could effectively soothe the pups' emotions, making them relax without realizing it. A few bold and hungry pups sniffed the fragrance of the meat in the air, hesitated for a moment, and finally couldn't resist cautiously stepping forward to nibble. Seeing their companions eat without issue, soon more pups started to scramble for the food, even using little paws to push away their companions, afraid of losing out. However, in less than 2 minutes, the sedative's effect began to take hold. The once wary pups, after eating the meat, became dazed. Some even found it hard to stand, their small bodies swaying gently. We can move now, Edgar said in a low voice. Be gentle. These are future werewolves, Lewis reminded. Understood. The hunters gently wrapped the pups with animal skins, preventing any struggle caused by discomfort. Although a few pups remained aware and resisted being obedient, writhing their little bodies against the hunters, but they were ultimately too weak, soon securely placed into leather bags. In this way, more than 20 pups completely lost their ability to resist, being placed one by one into specially designed leather bags to ensure they wouldn't be injured during transportation. Task completed. Lewis looked at the pups in the leather bags, smiling. Let's go. The hunters immediately lifted the bags, left the cave, and reunited with the knights, heading rapidly back towards the territory. After the pups were brought back to the Red Tide territory, Lewis ordered them to be placed in a pre-arranged wooden fenced pasture. The pasture was very spacious, with the ground covered in thick dry grass. In the corners, a few soft nests made of animal skins were set up to simulate the wolf pack's living conditions, reducing their unease. Despite this, after experiencing the sudden change, these pups were full of vigilance. They huddled together, ears perked up, baring small but sharp teeth, ready to defend against any outside threats. Lewis stood in front of the fence, his eyes falling on the most special pup among them. It was a noticeably more robust pup than the others, with long limbs and a gaze carrying a hint of defiance. Even as the other pups were huddling and whimpering lowly, it still stood upright, scanning the humans outside the fence with sharp eyes, showing no signs of panic typical of young animals. And this innate aura made it clear to anyone that it was different from the other pups. This guy, Edgar also noticed it, exclaiming, is the future Wolf King. The future Wolf King. Lewis suddenly thought of something. The corners of his mouth slightly turned up. Then you shall be called Lang Fang. The pup's ears twitched slightly, as if aware that the humans were discussing it. However, it did not show retreat, watching them warily. Edgar, how do you think we should tame them? Lewis withdrew his gaze, turning to the hunter Edgar beside him. Edgar's heart tightened. This question seemed casual, yet subtly carried a hint of a test. He knew the Lord was assessing his abilities. Edgar dared not slack, quickly organizing his thoughts, respectfully replying. First, build dependency. The pups need safety and food. We must ensure that every time they are fed, they see humans, so they regard humans as their providers. But that's not enough. Pups are naturally ferocious. Taming them with just food is unrealistic. They will guard their food and might even actively attack people. We must use a more direct method to teach them obedience. Specifically, if a pup guards its food, it must be disciplined immediately. If it resists, it must be pinned to the ground until it gives up resisting. In the world of wolves, strength is the rule. Lewis nodded in satisfaction. Continue. Edgar suddenly felt energized, the tension in his heart slightly relaxing. He continued. The second step, establish order. He pointed to Lang Fang. There is a clear hierarchy within a wolf pack, and this strongest pup, its physique, bearing, gaze, all prove it is born to be a wolf king. As long as it's tamed, other pups will naturally follow. Hearing this, Lewis thoughtfully reached out, gently knocking on the fence. Lang Fang instinctively looked up, fixing its gaze on him, with a hint of alertness, but did not immediately back down. So, your suggestion is? Louis continued to ask. Edgar mustered up the courage to say, you should personally tame Lang Feng. Only by making Lang Feng recognize you as its master will they be absolutely loyal to you. As soon as these words were out, the surrounding hunters couldn't help but look at Edgar in surprise. To let the Lord personally tame a wolf, that's quite bold. But Louis revealed a meaningful smile. The daily intelligence system had once reminded him, Edgar is a beast-taming master. Now it certainly seems correct. This old man has some skills. Louis slowly stood up, patting Edgar's shoulder. Very well. From today you are responsible for all beast-taming affairs in the Red Tide territory. Edgar was momentarily stunned. Then an uncontrollable excitement burst forth in his heart. He knelt on one knee. Your subordinate will not disappoint. A few months ago, he was still a pitiful wanderer in the Northern Territory, barely surviving by hunting. If it weren't for Louis' party passing by, he might have already frozen to death in the snowfield. And now, not only had he gained the Lord's appreciation, but he was also entrusted with important responsibilities. Moreover, given the character of this Lord, if he performs well, he certainly wouldn't be treated unfairly. The onlooking hunters, seeing this, all cast envious glances. Edgar, that guy, got lucky. Indeed, his status might be different in the future. Jack was originally just a small seed merchant in the south, barely making a living by selling grain and fruit seeds. Although life wasn't wealthy, at least there was enough to eat and drink. Until a few months ago, he overheard fellow merchants boasting at the tavern. Since the Northern Territory Pioneer Order was issued, many nobles have flocked to the Northern Territory to open up land, creating a huge demand for seeds, far exceeding supply. This piece of gossip set his heart racing. In the south, seed merchants were as plentiful as horse manure on the roadside, with hundreds scrambling for a piece of the pie, making it almost impossible to make a fortune. But the north was different. He'd heard it was barren and seeds were hard to come by. Once supplies arrived, they were sure to sell. This is an opportunity for wealth. Excited, Jack converted all the savings he'd accumulated over the years into seeds. He filled his small cart and rushed to the north, dreaming of getting rich overnight. However, when he stepped into Frost Halberd City, he was dumbfounded. Isn't this the largest city in the Northern Territory? The city was run down, the streets muddy, the passers-by in tattered clothes all looking weary, with not a sign of prosperous business opportunity. Jack's heart skipped a beat. A premonition of doom washed over him. I'm doomed. I won't lose everything, will I? But since he was already there, he couldn't just leave empty-handed. So, with determination, he set up his small stall on an empty lot on the east side of the market. Are you the seed seller, Jack? He hadn't even set up his goods when 3 knights rode over, bringing with them the dust of travel, their armor splattered with mud, their expressions somewhat anxious. Jack was stunned for a moment, his heart pounding. How did they know his name? Could it be that the fame of the Little Seed King had spread from the central province to the northern province? But a visitor is a guest, so he quickly straightened his back, cleared his throat, and was just about to introduce his products. What would you gentlemen like? We have potatoes, rye, oats, wheat. The lead knight interrupted him directly. We'll take everything. What? Jack looked shocked, wondering if he'd misheard. We want everything. How much? Jack was truly dumbfounded this time. Are all Northern Territory people this extravagant? Jack's mind raced, calculating how much he could sell this batch of goods for. Finally, he pretended to hesitate, then held out 5 fingers. Since you want it all, I'll give you a discount. 5 gold coins. 5 gold coins. In the south, a bag of potato seeds only cost 2 iron coins. The cost of all his seeds didn't even add up to 1 gold coin. Jack was ready to be haggled down, even considering lowering the price if they didn't agree. All right. To his surprise, the lead knight didn't even listen, just pulled out 5 gold coins from his purse and tossed them to him. Then, he and the other 2 knights quickly packed up all his seeds and blazed off in a hurry, leaving Jack standing there, clutching 5 heavy gold coins, dumbstruck. As the cold wind blew, he only then realized his stall had been swept clean. He hastily checked the gold coins, inspecting them one by one to confirm they were all real. They were real, all real. The next moment, a surge of ecstatic emotion overwhelmed him. Jack nearly jumped up. I'm rich. The cost of his seeds, plus the travel expenses to the Northern Territory, was less than 1 gold coin. Now he'd made a clear profit of 4 gold coins, and practically did nothing. Was business in the Northern Territory really this easy? Jack clutched the gold coins, his mind already racing to map out his next steps. This was just the beginning. If he went back and wholesaled a few hundred more bags of seeds, wouldn't he earn hundreds of gold coins? Thinking of this, Jack's smile stretched to 90 degrees. The Northern Territory was simply a gold mine. He wanted to go back and take a loan to become the #1 seed merchant in the Northern Territory. Of course, what he didn't know was that the seeds he had just sold included those of Frostblood Redberry, which could be sold for thousands of gold coins. Otherwise, he would have regretted it bitterly. As for the story of him losing everything later, that's a tale for another time. Just as Lambert was hastily returning to Red Tide Territory with the seeds, Lewis was riding his horse, inspecting the condition of the seed sowing in the fields. In the fields, farmers were busily sowing seeds, the sound of hoes turning the earth echoing constantly. Wherever Lewis went, the farmers would stop their work and respectfully salute. But unlike in other noble territories, the eyes of the farmers here didn't show servile fear, but rather a kind of genuine respect, especially those workers of slave origin. Their eyes held a fiery glow when they looked at Lewis. They longed for their efforts to be noticed by the Lord, and thus gain a chance at freedom. Lewis saw all of this, but didn't show much emotion. After all, in his view, there was no difference between slaves and freemen. Both were cattle and horses of the Red Tide Territory. Furthermore, the current system allowed these people to work harder, and he wasn't in a hurry to change it. When the time was ripe, perhaps he would consider more stable measures to release the slaves. But for now, they needed to prove their worth. At this moment, Mike walked over, leaning on a hoe, his face beaming with unconcealed joy. "My lord." Mike wiped the sweat off his forehead, his smile squeezing into wrinkles. "These fertilizers are working wonders. This year is sure to yield a good harvest." Lewis glanced over the tilled fields, noticing that the soil was indeed moist and soft, a deep color indicating it had fully absorbed nutrients. He nodded slightly. "What's the first crop?" "Rye, turnips, potatoes," Mike answered immediately. "These crops are hardy and mature quickly. If all goes well, we can expect the first harvest in 3 months." Lewis agreed with a nod. Rye could be ground into coarse grain. Turnips served both as vegetables and livestock feed. Meanwhile, potatoes were easy to plant and harvest, with long storage life, making them the most suitable for emergency food. Although some parts of Red Tide Territory were enhanced by geothermal heat, making it better than other northern lands, not all land was suited to intensive agriculture. To play it safe, prioritizing the planting of these hardy crops was the most sensible choice. But it was far from enough to satisfy Lewis's ambitions. Once greenhouse planting technology was perfected, he planned to grow a wider variety of crops to completely resolve the food issues. In Red Tide Territory, Lewis stood silently on the ridge, his gaze sweeping over the land before him. The fertile black soil shimmered faintly under the sunlight. The busy figures of farmers intertwined, sowing the seeds of Red Tide Territory's future hope. This land, originally a barren permafrost, was being revitalized little by little under his plan. Lewis felt an indescribable sense of accomplishment in his heart. Dead, all dead. Sif's heart pounded fiercely. She squeezed the horse's belly with all her might, and the war horse galloped wildly across the icy snowfield, hooves kicking up a white mist. The cries of battle behind her echoed in the night, the howl of hounds mingling with the warrior's screams. Why did it turn out this way? Just days ago, she sat in a warm tent, listening to her father recounting the tribe's glory, her brothers laughing and playing, her mother gently tidying her hair. She thought she would lead her people across the snowfield like her father in the future. But that banquet destroyed everything completely. Her father, Harold Frostman, suddenly collapsed at the banquet, convulsing all over, letting out a painful howl, and died in front of everyone's eyes. In the following days, her mother, brothers, and sisters died one after another, either executed or died from mysterious accidents. Their heads were hung on stone pillars, blood dripped onto the white snow, strikingly red. The words of her brother Sigel still echoed in her mind. "Sif, listen." Sigel gripped her shoulders, speaking urgently. "Run south, never come back." She shook her head desperately, eyes filled with tears. "No, brother, Sigel suddenly seized her neck, forcing her to look up at him. "Listen, run south, don't come back. Never think about revenge." Then without further words, Sigel whipped the horse with all his might, drew his war axe, and turned to face the pursuing soldiers. "Ha!" he roared lowly, blood boiling. His eyes turned red. The totems on his body suddenly lit up, muscles swelling like rocks. He became a raging god of war, blood-boiling berserker, using life as the price, burning their blood to gain temporary invincible power. Come on, bastards, let's go to hell together. He laughed loudly, raising the giant axe to face the enemies surging from the darkness. Sif's heart felt as if it were being torn apart. She wanted to rush up and fight alongside her brother, but the warhorse had already bolted south with her. The chill had not yet completely faded, and the river on the west side of Red Tide territory still carried the cold remnants of winter. Each spring and autumn, this river would welcome migrating fish. They swam upstream to spawn on the upstream shoals, and when the fry hatched, they returned to the deep water areas with the flow. The locals had known this natural law since ancient times, but their fishing methods still remained at the stage of stabbing fish with wooden spears and scooping them with bamboo baskets. While they could barely fill their bellies, compared to the river's true potential, it was like a drop in the bucket. So under Lewis's order, 100 fishermen set out for the riverbank, organized to begin a fishery construction plan. They used wooden stakes and stones to simply build temporary docks. Carpenters were also called together to lead fishermen in day and night work to build fishing boats. They worked tirelessly and finally built 10 fishing boats capable of operating in the water. Within 2 weeks, preparing for the future fish tides, the fishery here experienced earth-shattering changes in these 2 weeks. But no one expected their first large-scale fishing would come so quickly. The cause was that Lewis received an important piece of intelligence from the daily intelligence system yesterday. 1. Tomorrow, the river on the west side of Red Tide territory will see a large number of fish. This news excited him greatly, and he immediately ordered all fishermen gather at the riverbank dock. Prepare for a full-scale fishing. So the next day, the riverbank was crowded. 100 fishermen lined up waiting for the Lord's command. On the modest but already forming wooden docks, Lord Lewis stood high and surveyed everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, today, we will have our first large-scale fishing operation in Red Tide territory. Do you remember a month ago how desolate this place looked? But look now, we have boats, we have nets, we have docks, all are results of your effort. We no longer simply wait for fate's handout, but use our own hands to grasp the future. And today, everything is ready. We only need to reach for it. And we will let everyone in Red Tide territory know that the days of hunger are over. May we return fully loaded. The fishermen, fired up by Lewis's words, raised their nets and spears, shouting in unison, "Return fully loaded." But Luke, the fishery official beside Lewis, showed a trace of indescribable anxiety in his eyes. Will there really be fish? In the past month, Lewis's judgment had been proven right time and again, forcing Luke and others to believe. But the problem is, this is fishing. Fishing relies heavily on luck. Even the most experienced fishermen can hardly predict which day will be a big catch, or where they might return empty-netted. He was a bit shocked when Lewis notified him yesterday. Why was the Lord so sure there would be a large catch today? What if there wasn't? If the river yields little today, the inspiring speech just given would become a joke. And if the fishermen, having prepared for half a month, gain nothing, it's a small thing if the fisherman's morale is hit. But the most important thing is, would the Lord react angrily? Then what should he do? Would he be stripped naked and thrown into the river for bait by the Lord? Luke secretly glanced at Lewis, finding that he didn't panic at all. He stood there with a faint smile on his face, like he already saw the river churning with fish. This is the Lord's poise. Luke was a bit lost in thought. Just then, Lewis interrupted Luke's daydream. Is everything ready? Ready, Luke quickly replied. Lewis nodded. Then let's begin. Luke took a deep breath, stood on the platform, and loudly gave the command, "Brothers, go according to plan." The fishermen, long waiting, began to collaborate. According to Lewis's plan, today's fishing operation will be divided into 3 groups to ensure maximum efficiency. The first group is the main force, made up of 10 fishing boats. The fishermen skillfully maneuvered the boats and positioned the nets in the middle of the river, creating a vast net barrier. The second group is the small-scale fishing team, with relatively fewer people. They are responsible for casting nets in the shallow water areas along the shore, catching fish near the bank. Fishermen skillfully deployed nets into the water, the mesh gaps just right for catching smaller fish. The third group uses traditional fishing tools. They hold spears, rapidly probing the water, and once they spot fish, they strike quickly to capture the escaping fish. Some fishermen also set traps along the shore. These simple yet effective tools can effectively capture some fish unwilling to approach the nets. further supplementing the catch. "Brothers, on with the original plan," Luke shouted at the top of his voice. And the shore instantly bustled with activity. 10 fishing boats lined up with a clatter, the paddles churning up the water into a froth. Then the fishermen sank giant seine nets into the river. These nets had been meticulously improved. As soon as they sank into the water, they instantly tightened. "Hold the formation. Don't let the fish escape." Reg, the old captain, had veins bulging on his arms with the tension of a bowstring in his hands. Shadows darted chaotically underwater, surging like a tide. "They're in the net! They're in the net!" Someone shouted first, and the whole river seemed to explode in excitement. Fat-headed river fish slammed against the nets, but the ironclad formation of 10 boats left them no escape route. The fishermen deftly pulled on the ropes, trapping the fish securely. The surface of the water erupted with countless splashes, fish leaping into the air, their silvery scales gleaming under the sunlight, looking very pleasing. "Quick, pull, don't let the net slacken." "Ha, this is the most fish I've seen in my life." The fishermen braced their arms, working together to pull up the full load. The seine net kept contracting, so heavy it even caused the boat to tilt slightly. When the last net was finally raised, the boat was piled high with lively fish flopping about. Each fish was much larger than typical river fish, glistening with an enticing sheen, their plump bodies constantly twisting. This time, their harvest exceeded everyone's expectations. More than 2,000 fish, enough to feed the entire red tide territory for several days. On the other side of the river, the net-casting fishermen were also giving it their all. "Get the angle right when casting, or you'll miss the shoal," the seasoned old fisherman instructed his young apprentice. The inexperienced young man took a deep breath, gripping the net steadily in his hands before throwing it with force. The net drew a perfect arc in the air, enveloping a group of fish that hadn't escaped yet. "Got them!" He excitedly tightened the rope, and the water surface immediately churned with large splashes, snaring several 2-foot-long fat fish struggling mightily. "This one is huge." He excitedly lifted a fish as long as his arm, drawing envious glances from his companions. "If we cook this one into soup, imagine how delicious it'd be." The group grinned widely, their hands working even faster. Although their catch wasn't as big as the seiners, they successfully caught hundreds of fresh fish, each person's wooden bucket packed to the brim. On another section of the shoreline, the traditional fishing group composed of locals was engaged in another form of hunt. Each held a polished fish spear, their eyes almost glued to the river. "Here it comes." An experienced fisherman suddenly swung his arm, the spear piercing the water. Splash! Blood-tinged froth surfaced, and a 3-pound fish was securely speared, struggling desperately but ultimately unable to escape fate. In that short time, their buckets were already stacked with 7 or 8 big fish, tails flapping outside the bucket rims. Meanwhile, further away on the shallow shores, some fishermen quietly placed fish traps in preset traps, waiting for fish to wander in. "Wait a bit longer, a bit longer." Suddenly, a fisherman brightened up, quickly lifting the fish trap. "Caught them, over a dozen." They cheered excitedly. These fish weren't large, but their tender meat made them the most popular delicacies. The entire fishing operation lasted for several hours, before the fishermen gradually put away their nets. Every boat was piled high with fresh fish. They slapped their scales and wagged their tails with a slap-slap sound, splashing water all around. More than 3,000 fish, over 3,000. When the final count came out, the entire dock erupted in excitement. "Lord is indeed wise as God. He said there'd be fish, and indeed there were. We've never seen such fishing methods before, catching so much in one go. Lord not only knows how to govern the territory, but he's also amazing at fishing." The fishermen clapped and celebrated, patting each other's shoulders. Joy reflected on their faces as they praised Lewis. Even those who doubted today's catch were completely convinced by the facts. Luke stood by, looking at the scene with indescribable amazement. His initial anxiety had long been replaced by surprise. He really hadn't expected Lewis's predictions to be so accurate, even incredibly so. He couldn't help but look up at the Lord standing high on the dock. Lewis wore a faint smile on his face. Seeing the satisfaction on the fishermen's faces filled him with joy. He knew that he had just taken the first step for red tide territory to emerge from adversity. The food crisis in red tide territory could finally ease a bit, and today's catch was just the beginning. It marked the start of a long-term industry. As a transmigrator, Lewis certainly understood the importance of sustainability, so he devised a meticulous fishing strategy early on. Firstly, To ensure the ongoing reproduction of fish stocks, Lewis required all nets have larger mesh sizes. This would allow immature fish to escape easily, continue growing, and wait for the next breeding season. Moreover, fishing was only allowed at fixed times each day, with at least one day a week designated as a closed season to give the river and fish a breather. Only by doing so would future catches remain abundant, instead of suddenly drying up one day. Not only wild fishing, Lewis also planned to establish dedicated breeding areas, selecting quality fish as broodstock to raise in designated waters. This would make the fishery more stable, not completely reliant on nature's rewards. As Lewis gazed at the mountain of fish on the dock, he wondered how to manage them. No matter how much food there is, if not properly managed, it would just turn into waste. How about hosting a celebration feast, Lewis thought. In just a few days, it would mark exactly a month since he arrived at Red Tide Territory, a day worth commemorating. In this month, Red Tide Territory had transformed from a barren land with scarce resources and low spirit, gradually restoring order, building fisheries, agriculture, and the lives of the people began to show hope. Lewis knew this wasn't entirely his doing. Therefore, this feast was not only to celebrate the bountiful catch, but also to honor those fishermen, craftsmen, and soldiers who contributed to Red Tide Territory. However, the feast could only consume part of the fish. A large amount still needed proper handling. Though it would only feed 1,000 people for a few days, fishery was a long-term industry. The caught fish couldn't be wasted. They ultimately needed to be preserved. Preparing for the food shortage of winter, Lewis suddenly thought of a method to preserve fish long-term, and he wanted to try it out. The evening glow showered the Red Tide Territory. Inside the smoking shed near the hot springs, several smoked fish hung on wooden racks, their golden skins slightly wrinkled, exuding a rich smoky aroma. Lewis stood by, scrutinizing these fish smoked for hours. He then lightly pressed the surface with his finger. The dry, resilient texture satisfied him, and he nodded approvingly. "Oh Lord," Sally stood beside him, speaking cautiously, her hands unconsciously twisting together. Her eyes carried nervousness, afraid that her smoked fish was not good enough. Upon hearing her, Lewis lifted his head and praised, "Well smoked. The texture and color of the fish are great." Sally let out a sudden sigh of relief, a hint of a nervous smile appearing on her face. All according to your method. Without your guidance, we wouldn't have managed. You have deft hands." Lewis casually tore off a piece of fish meat and tossed it into his mouth. Though the fish meat was dry and hard, its rich smoky fragrance slowly spread in his mouth as he chewed, and the taste was not bad. Standing nearby, Hilko yawned tiredly, his dark circles almost falling to the ground. It wasn't that Lewis deliberately overworked him, just that they were the only two literate people in the entire territory, so he had to reluctantly have him work 996. Today, to comfort him, he brought him here to eat fish. "Here, have a taste." Lewis casually handed over a smoked fish. Hilko's weary eyes sparked with some interest, and he took a bite. "Tastes better than I expected." "This is Sally's hard-earned result," Lewis praised. Hearing her name, Sally was suddenly a bit flustered, quickly waving her hands. No. Being able to smoke these fish is all thanks to your guidance. I don't know this." Lewis quietly listened to Sally's words, but his gaze lingered on the smoked fish. The Red Tide Territory was located in the cold northern territory, where food resources were limited. Though fishery was an important supply source, every winter and early spring, the rivers nearly froze over, leaving almost no catch. To avoid falling into famine, he had to find an effective way to preserve food through the long, harsh winter. So Lewis came up with an innovative method using geothermal heat to smoke fish. Hot spring smoked fish. Can it really work? Hilko was full of disbelief when he first heard of this plan. Compared to simply air drying, this method removes more moisture, extending preservation time, explained Lewis. Regardless, this method was worth trying, so he selected the meticulous Sally to lead the women in an initial attempt. Step 1. Process the fish body. First, they had to open the fish belly and remove the innards, but keep the fish skin intact. Fish skin not only prevents the fish meat from falling apart during smoking, but also locks in the fragrance, making the smoked fish taste better. Next, they cured it with coarse salt, for varying durations from several hours to a day, depending on weather and humidity. This not only removed the fishy smell and enhanced flavor, but also removed a portion of the moisture, preparing it for subsequent smoking. Step 2. Build the smoking rack. In the hot spring area, They wove a row of smoking racks using branches, bamboo strips, and vines. They also installed simple windproof and insulating facilities on both sides of the rack, maximizing the penetration of hot spring steam into the fish while preventing heat loss. Step 3. The smoking process. Geothermal resources were not stable, so the smoking time was split into 2 to 3 days over multiple rounds. If the temperature was too high, the fish meat would harden, too low, and preservation would be difficult. So each batch of smoked fish required careful adjustments in time and temperature. All these seemed tedious, but after some time and Sally's continuous attempts, they had achieved small-scale success. The fish hanging on the smoking racks had become one of the hopes for surviving the winter. In the red tide territory, Lewis nodded slightly. We can increase the scale now. A hint of delight flashed in Sally's eyes. She and the women under her had worked hard for several days for this. In a world dominated by force, women's status was always low. If they could take on the responsibility of smoking fish, their status in the red tide territory could improve considerably. She pressed her lips together, cautiously asking, "Lord, are you saying you want us to take charge of smoking fish? You've already done well, haven't you?" Lewis gave her a light glance, his gaze sweeping across the smoking rack. If the scale expands, naturally experienced people should be in charge. Sally's heart raced, and she couldn't help but grasp her apron tightly, feeling an unprecedented sense of certainty. "Thank you, Lord." She instinctively bent down to bow, her voice carrying a slight tremor. Lewis chuckled. "It's I who should thank you all." Just then, a knight came over and whispered in Lewis's ear, "Lord Lambert has returned." Lewis's eyes lit up. This was indeed a double blessing. He immediately strode toward the residential area, heading to meet the three who had just entered the area. Lambert knelt on one knee, murmuring, "Mission accomplished." Lewis nodded slightly, a hint of comfort flashing through his eyes. The dependable Lambert always brought a sense of reassurance. "You've worked hard," he said solemnly, then glanced at the two elite knights behind Lambert. Though they seemed slightly more fatigued than Lambert, not one of them complained about the hardships of the journey. "We'll discuss the detailed report tomorrow," Lewis said with a gentle smile. "Tonight, rest well. At tomorrow's award ceremony, you'll receive your deserved rewards." The three saluted in unison, an attitude of respectful acknowledgement. "Yes, leave the seeds behind, then you can go rest." The three knights handed the packages over to the attendant without hesitation, and left with their travel fatigue. Using fighting energy for long-distance journeys, even elite knights couldn't avoid physical and mental exhaustion. Lewis watched them leave until their figures disappeared before turning and heading to his office, the attendant following with lots of seed packages in hand. One package after another was neatly stacked on the office desk. All results of this procurement. Lewis waved his hand, signaling the attendant to withdraw. When the door softly closed, he stepped to the desk and, following the intelligence system's tips, found the seeds he was looking for. He gently picked up one, examined it in his palm. The seed was reddish-brown, smooth-skinned, indistinguishable from ordinary cranberry seeds at first glance. If not for the intelligence system, he might have mistaken it for a common seed, but it was anything but ordinary. This was the frost blood redberry, a magical fruit from the extreme cold of the Northern Territory. Consuming it not only strengthened the body, but had peculiar effects on a knight's fighting energy refinement. This meant, once successfully cultivated, it not only could become a unique specialty of the Red Tide territory, it could also become a strategic resource coveted by all major nobility. Lewis looked at the seed, as if seeing mountains of gold and silver beckoning. It has been a full month since Lewis arrived at the Red Tide territory. At this moment, he stands on a temporarily constructed wooden platform, overlooking the crowd gathered below. 12 knights clad in iron armor are lined up on both sides, deliberately maintaining a uniform stance, making the Lord's figure appear even more imposing in the firelight. Woo! The sound of a horn cuts through the night sky, officially commencing the commendation ceremony of the Red Tide territory. Over 30 knights of the Red Tide territory kneel on one knee. They press their left fists to their chests, grip their knight's swords with their right hands, and recite the oath Lewis had written in advance. "We believe in the dragon ancestor, follow the Lord of the Red Tide. Loyal to Lewis Calvin, we pledge to defend the honor of the Red Tide with blood and sweat." The resounding oath echoes across the square. Then the entire square erupts with deafening cheers. Soldiers bang their shields. Farmers raise hoes and wooden staffs, and even children shout excitedly. Lewis slightly raises his hand, signaling for everyone to be quiet. The clamor gradually subsides, and all eyes focus on the young lord. Only then does Lewis slowly speak. We have been in the Red Tide territory for a month now. A month ago, this place was still desolate and barren. We faced challenges like poverty, hunger, snowstorms, and wild beast attacks. He pauses, his gaze sweeping over the gathered citizens. But now, we have passed the first phase of the crisis, thanks to you. It was you who built the first shelter from the cold, ensuring children and the elderly no longer slept outdoors in the snow. It was you who caught the first river fish, filling the stomachs of brothers and sisters. It was you who cultivated the first piece of farmland and sowed the first seeds, bringing hope to this barren land. All of this is because of you, Lewis declares passionately. Your sweat has begun to rejuvenate this permafrost. In the crowd, most people clenched their fists, eyes reddened with emotion. They had never heard a lord credit the achievements to the common people. In the past, just not getting whipped was considered fortunate. Lewis' gaze sweeps across the square. Of course, effort deserves reward. In the Red Tide territory, no matter who you are, if you work hard enough and are loyal enough, you will get your due reward. Next, I want to commend the heroes who have made outstanding contributions to the Red Tide territory. As his words fall, the entire square instantly becomes quiet. Everyone holds their breath, eyes locked on the figure atop the platform. Agricultural official Mike, the stooped middle-aged man, stumbles forward, his old mud-stained boots slipping on the wooden steps. Yet when he looks up at the Lord, his spine, unstraightened for decades, becomes erect. Mike, you have optimized the farming methods, rejuvenating this barren land. Lewis points to the farmland in the distance that is beginning to take shape. Therefore, I officially promote you to the position of agricultural director, granting you greater jurisdiction over farmland, and awarding you an additional plot for experimental planting. Tears slide down Mike's face. Thank you, sir. Excited applause bursts from the crowd, with many farmers cheering enthusiastically. Craftsman representative Mike, an old man with skin darkened by the sun, strides onto the stage, his face full of pride. Your talent in architectural design has made the houses in the Red Tide territory more sturdy and better insulated, laying the foundation for the territory's development. Lewis points to the row of semi-subterranean collective dwellings surrounding the square. Therefore, I have decided to grant you the authority to lead the craftsman team and provide more financial support. Mike trembles with excitement. I will not disappoint your expectations. Fishery official Luke. Next, more than a dozen people are called to the stage, with identities ranging from knights and craftsmen to hunters and farmers. Most of these people come from humble origins, some even being slaves. Lewis steps forward and personally places special labor medals on each awardee, due to limited conditions. It's merely a wooden medal intricately carved by a carpenter at Lewis' request. Nonetheless, the awardees carefully hold them, fearing they might drop. After the awards are presented, Lewis shouts to the people below, these individuals have contributed sweat and blood to the prosperity of the Red Tide territory, making significant contributions. Let's thank them with applause. Clap, clap, clap. Thunderous applause suddenly erupts, resounding throughout the square. These honorees straighten their backs, their eyes filled with emotion and tears, their chest medals reflecting dazzling light from the bonfire. They are just ordinary fishermen, hunters, craftsmen, and even lowly slaves. Yet at this moment, they stand in the spotlight, receiving the highest commendation from the Red Tide territory. It's a feeling they've never experienced in their lifetime. If Lewis were to ask them to traverse a mountain of knives and a sea of flames now, they wouldn't hesitate. Of course, we also applaud those who have similarly made efforts. As soon as his words fall, applause rises again, this time not just for those on the stage, but for everyone present, because each person is using their own way to make the Red Tide territory stronger. Then Lewis' gaze gradually sweeps over the square, focusing on those wearing tattered clothes, still marked by the brand of slavery. They lower their heads, eyes flickering with light, hearts filled with anxiety and anticipation. Today I will fulfill another promise. The slaves' hearts suddenly quicken, the air seeming to freeze for an instant. Below individuals, Lewis begins to announce a series of names, all slaves who have excelled in labor, construction, and development over the past month. Those whose names are called display expressions of disbelief. It wasn't until someone beside them nudged them that they realized and trembled. As they walked onto the stage, today, you officially gain your freedom. Lewis waves, and knights step forward to burn their slave certificates with a single fire. They burst into tears, kneeling and kowtowing, thanking Louis' kindness in this way. Meanwhile, the eyes of those not freed shone with complex emotions. There is envy, regret, but most of all hope. As long as they perform a little better, next time will surely be their turn. Loyalty and talent are more important than bloodline. Louis' voice resonates throughout the square. From today, the Red Tide territory will establish a regular reward system, whereby anyone who contributes to the territory can receive appropriate rewards. This statement makes the square boil, every face glowing with the light of hope. Changing classes is no longer an unattainable dream, but a reality achievable through hard work. For the prosperity of the Red Tide territory, cheers. Louis raises his glass. The strong liquor reflects the bonfire, catching a layer of firelight. Cheers. Everyone raises their glasses and erupts into deafening cheers. The aroma of grilled fish permeated the air. The women carried plates of freshly cooked fish. The townspeople sat together, holding freshly grilled fish, eating and chatting, occasionally bursting into laughter. To our great Lord, someone shouted out. Everyone raised their glasses excitedly, echoing, to our great Lord. Glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. Louis, sitting at the head, watched all of this, and couldn't help but smile. Compared to the hidden battles at the nobles' banquets in the south, he preferred laughing, singing, and dancing around the bonfire with the common townspeople here. Perhaps it was the influence of alcohol. Louis casually took the xylophone handed to him by a knight. His slender fingers plucked the strings, releasing a series of clear notes, as he sang a simple tune from his homeland earth. Edelweiss, Edelweiss, every morning you greet me, forever bless my homeland. The square instantly fell silent. Everyone held their breath to listen, as if transported to that faraway place. When the last note fell, cheers erupted like a tidal wave. One more song, someone led the shout. The Lord sings so well. One more song, a toast to the Lord. The whole square joined in the clamor. Even the most reserved knights couldn't help but laugh. Louis shook his head and chuckled, casually picking up a piece of grilled fish and taking a bite, letting the merriment and laughter drift through the night air. The next day, when Louis woke up, daylight had already spilled through the gap in the curtains, and the air still held the remnant smoke of last night's bonfire. Probably drank a bit too much. He rubbed his temples and sighed tiredly. He usually woke up before dawn to practice the breathing technique and cultivate fighting energy. But last night was so joyous that it led to an unusually late morning today. He instinctively reached out to the side to confirm the other half of the bed was empty, before he sighed with relief. Thankfully, no mistakes were made. After washing up, Louis sat cross-legged on the bed, took a deep breath, and began to practice the tidal breathing technique. The fighting energy flowed slowly through the veins, but Louis could clearly feel its stagnation. Still at that bottleneck, a mid-tier official knight, unable to advance. Damn it, when will I be able to break through? Even though I've been training with the strictest regimen, my aptitude is to mediocre. Relying solely on training to advance in rank is much harder for me than for others. If only I could find something similar to the Northern Crystal Cod again. Useless intelligence system. Give me something good, he thought helplessly, as he opened the intelligence system to see if there was anything noteworthy updated today. 1. After the feast, the agricultural official Mike proposed to Tanya and succeeded. 2. The Icefield young wolf, Leng Feng, defeated all the young wolves raised in Red Tide territory and became their alpha. 3. The former Cold Moon tribe little princess, Sif, fled to Red Tide territory. She is starving and freezing and unconscious on the prairie, and will be attacked by a frosty white bear at 5 p.m. The first piece of intelligence made him raise an eyebrow slightly. Mike, that old guy, actually found love again. This agricultural official spent his days with dirt, always thinking about optimizing land and increasing yield. Who knew he would quietly handle such a big matter? Tanya, he remembered this woman, was a widow from the indigenous community, in her early 30s with 3 children, resilient and capable. Mike managing to win her over was quite a surprise. APMM, that's something to celebrate. Looks like Red Tide territory's population will be increasing by a few more. He shook his head with a light laugh, happy for his old comrade. The second piece of news met his expectations. Leng Feng lived up to expectations, standing out among the young wolves and becoming the alpha. Louis had confidence in him from the beginning. After all, this young wolf naturally had a certain untamed regal demeanor. Whether it was its physique, demeanor, or gaze, it was different from other young Icefield wolves. Becoming the leader of the pack was almost inevitable. Very good, Lewis nodded in satisfaction. This is the werewolf I chose. However, when his gaze fell on the third piece of intelligence, his smile vanished instantly. The Cold Moon Tribe's little princess, Sif, fled to Red Tide territory. This piece of intelligence made Lewis's heart sink. Regarding intelligence about the Cold Moon Tribe, the daily intelligence system had always been sending him updates. Since the old chieftain's death, the tribe had fallen into complete chaos. The old chieftain's family was purged, the Elder Council lost its authority, and the leaders drew in their own forces, with factional fights worsening. If one phrase could describe it, it would be, the entire Cold Moon Tribe was in complete disarray. But even so, Lewis never thought the Cold Moon Tribe's little princess would flee to Red Tide territory and end up unconscious. The most pressing issue is, at 5 p.m., she will be the Frosty White Bear's dinner. What to do with this mess? Lewis rubbed his brow and sighed. Lewis had only two choices before him, to save her, or not to save her. He pondered for a long time, gently tapping his fingers on the table. Not save her. After all, the matters of the Cold Moon Tribe are immensely complicated, and Sif's emergence could potentially bring a series of unknown troubles. Besides, she's already unconscious on the prairie. By 5 p.m., she'd become the Frosty White Bear's dinner, and there would be no further connections to deal with. But in the end, Lewis decided to step in. Firstly, since Sif had already fled near Red Tide territory, it meant she had distanced herself from the power struggles of the Cold Moon Tribe, reducing the risk in rescuing her. Secondly, although he wasn't a saint, his genuine values wouldn't let him stand by an innocent little girl, regardless of her identity. If he had the ability to save her, he couldn't simply watch her die. Otherwise, his conscience would never be at ease. Thirdly, despite the idea being far-fetched and unrealistic, what if one day his strength was sufficient, and he could use Sif's name to subdue the Cold Moon Tribe? Of course, for now, considering these things was premature. Overall, based on reason, kindness, and even a little bit of fantasy, Lewis made the decision to rescue her. Lambert, Lewis called for his guardian knight. Lambert quickly entered, respectfully lowering his head. Lord, I want to go hunting. Have people prepare, Lewis said casually. Lambert froze slightly, looking surprised at the Lord. Since coming to Red Tide territory, this young lord had been busy with territorial affairs from morning till night, let alone hunting. He didn't even have time for a morning stroll. Yet today he suddenly had a keen interest in going hunting. As a qualified attendant, Lambert didn't ask much, just nodded and replied, "Understood. I'll arrange hunters and knights." Despite spring having descended upon the northern territory, the cold wind was still biting. Sif's hands tightly gripped the reins, her fingertips long since numb. The war horse beneath her was panting heavily, its forehooves stumbling, and its sweat quickly frosting in the cold night. Faster, just a bit faster. Behind her was the burning fire of the Cold Moon Tribe, bought with her brother's life. No turning back, no stopping. Run south, never return. Sigel's roar still echoed in her mind, like a nail driven deep into Sif's soul. Sigel was dead, as were her father, mother, brothers, and sisters. But she was still alive in disgrace, like an abandoned ghost, wandering this world with no place to call home. Not knowing where to go, she just kept fleeing south. The food had long been eaten up, and Sif could only quench her thirst with river water and barely stave off hunger with tree bark and some wild fruits. After several days, the war horse finally exhausted its strength, letting out a long neigh before collapsing. Sif also tumbled down from the horse's back, heavily hitting the ground. She wanted to stand up, but couldn't even move a finger. Her consciousness gradually drifted, and Sigel's face appeared in her mind. "I'm sorry, brother, I can't go on." Her vision gradually blurred, and Sif's consciousness sank into darkness. A mighty troop from the Red Tide was marching northward. The hunters were focused, and the knights looked around vigilantly, all wanting to perform well in the hunt. After all, this hunt was personally led by the Lord, and Lewis, wrapped in a thick wolf fur cloak, swayed slightly as he rode his warhorse. A trail of chaotic animal tracks appeared on the wasteland. An experienced hunter immediately squatted down to examine them, speaking in a low voice. "Lord, there are signs of rabbit activity ahead, and not just one." Lewis nodded gently, slowly drew the short bow from his waist, knocked an arrow, and squinted ahead. Sure enough, beside a clump of withered grass not far away, a gray-white rabbit cautiously poked its head out. Whoosh! The arrow shot through the air, its speed nearly invisible, and instantly pierced through the rabbit's neck with precision. The rabbit rolled over, twitched twice, and then lost all signs of life. Great shot. As expected of the Lord. The hunters and knights immediately applauded and cheered, each trying to flatter. Indeed, the Lord is skilled in both literature and martial arts, even hunting with such precision, with such archery. Even the kingdom's imperial hunters may feel ashamed. A far northern province had 100 such sharpshooters. What would we fear of a barbarian race invasion? Yes, yes, truly a born warrior. Even a knight picked up the rabbit with both hands and ran to Louis, his face full of admiration. Lord, could this rabbit be a descendant of the Beast King? Otherwise, how could it be so difficult to shoot? Louis's mouth slightly twitched. This group truly knows how to flatter. However, he didn't mind, as the prestige and renown of a lord sometimes had to be built upon these little legendary deeds. Of course, this hunt was merely a cover. The real target was the little princess about to be devoured by the frosty white bear. Using hunting as an excuse to go north to find a person was Louis's way of not letting others know. He had a prophetic-like ability. Of course, Louis was also aware that some smart people around him had already started noticing the anomaly. They were not foolish, long having sensed that their lord was unusually lucky. Since arriving from the south to the northern province, he could precisely predict all sorts of crises and opportunities. To say this was merely coincidence, no one would believe it. But in this fantastical worldview, even if Louis directly told them he had the daily intelligence system, they wouldn't understand what those 6 words represented, as this world had no web fiction. Thus, they attributed it all to the dragon ancestor's divine grace. This hunt is truly bountiful. Lord, your archery is practically divine. Indeed, indeed, even the dragon ancestor is blessing us today. Ha ha. We must certainly celebrate once we return. And so, chatting and laughing, this troop made its way, yielding a plentiful harvest along the way. The hunters killed several fat deer and even caught some rare cold region fish by the ice river. Sometimes relaxing like this doesn't seem too bad. Watching everyone in high spirits, Louis couldn't help but smile. Suddenly, a scout hunter hurriedly rushed back to the troop, with a strange expression on his face. Lord, a girl has been found ahead. The hunter's words immediately silenced the entire hunting party, everyone looking at him in confusion. A girl, Lambert frowned. How could there be a girl in the wilderness? Just not far, near the ice river. The hunter panted, with a look of lingering fear on his face. She lay unconscious in the snow, looking like she's fainted. Found her. Louis's gaze subtly changed, but he maintained a calm expression. Lead the way. As they passed through a low forest and approached the ice river, they discovered the unconscious Sif. The girl lay on her back in the cold snow, slightly curled up, her white short hair scattered messily with wind and snow. The fur coat on her was worn out, with her shoulders and arms exposed to the air, frozen purple. A few partially healed wounds showed her struggles over the past few days, yet her delicate face still bore a trace of stubbornness, showing not a hint of weakness. Even in a faint, an experienced hunter bent down to observe for a moment, his face changing. Lord, she's from the northern tribe. Another hunter carefully examined the patterns on her belt, softly supplementing, Cold Moon Tribe. The air fell silent for a few seconds. The surrounding knights couldn't help exchanging several glances. The Cold Moon Tribe was indeed a major enemy of the northern province. But Louis only took a glance and made a decision. Bring her back for treatment. The knights didn't hesitate, quickly lifting the girl and cautiously placing her on a warhorse. The hunters then led a cart full of game, and the group grandly set out on their return journey. Upon returning to the Red Tide territory, the girl was placed in an empty room and handed over to an indigenous healer. With some medical knowledge, Louis was silent for a moment, his gaze falling on the girl's face. At this moment, her eyes were tightly closed, her lips cracked from the cold, her brows slightly furrowed as if fighting against death. Louis took out a bottle of life potion from his family and handed it to the doctor. Give this to her. The doctor hesitated slightly, but still slowly poured the liquid between the girl's lips. After a while, her once pale face seemed to regain a bit of color, and her breathing steadied somewhat. Although still unconscious, it seemed her life had been saved. A bottle of life potion is quite expensive. Hope she wakes up, Louis said as he looked at the unconscious girl. Sigh. If only someone in our territory knew how to prepare demon soil. Louis sat behind his desk, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping on the surface, his tone sounding like a casual complaint. But his gaze occasionally swept towards Hilko, who was sitting at the smaller desk beside him. Hilko was engrossed in writing, documenting the fish catch and smoked fish production. The dark circles under his eyes were even more pronounced than they were last night. Hearing Lewis's complaint, he abruptly stopped writing, pressed his fingers against his temples, and tried hard to clear his mind. Did he hear wrong? No, it definitely wasn't an auditory hallucination, because this was already the 5th time he heard Lewis say this today. No matter how sleep-deprived he was, he couldn't possibly have hallucinated 5 times, right? Hilko's hand paused slightly, finally confirming one thing. This was a deliberate hint at him. Making demon soil was an entry-level skill for every alchemist, and of course, he, being an alchemy genius, knew how to do it. But the problem was that he hadn't disclosed this layer of his identity to anyone, at least not in the Red Tide territory. So, how did Lewis know? His mind raced, trying to recall if he'd accidentally let something slip at some point. Or maybe, he simply couldn't hide that aura of an alchemy genius. In the midst of his thoughts, Lewis spoke once more, still in that helpless tone. If only we could make demon soil ourselves. This was the 6th time. Lewis, like a monk chanting scriptures, and Hilko finally couldn't take it anymore. He took a deep breath and feigned nonchalance, saying, "I know a bit. I learned some at the church school." As soon as the words left his mouth, Hilko wanted to smack himself. Who was he kidding? A church school would never teach how to make demon soil. However, Lewis seemed to believe this statement completely, even showing a look of sudden realization. He asked with interest, "Oh, is that so? Can you help me then?" The air in the office fell into a subtle silence. Did he really believe me? Hilko glanced at Lewis without showing any emotions. Lewis's expression didn't look like he was fooled at all. Instead, it looked like a gaze filled with anticipation, as if saying, "You finally admitted it. Now hurry and make the demon soil." Hilko. Of course, Lewis knew about Hilko's identity as an alchemy apprentice. The frostblood red berry had to grow in highly acidic soil. Only then could it efficiently absorb nutrients, making the fruit full and bright red, enhancing fighting energy better. If the soil was neutral or alkaline, the nutrients would be tightly locked, causing the plant to grow poorly, with yellowing leaves and even failing to bear fruit. But the problem was, Lewis only had a general idea about how to prepare acidic soil, not the specific ratios and methods. However, he knew who did Hilko, who was hiding his alchemy apprentice identity. Lewis originally wanted to wait for the other to come forward, but the current situation was special, and the cultivation of frostblood redberry couldn't be delayed. What a pity, today he would have to reveal himself. Silence spread between the two, the firewood in the fireplace crackling. Hilko looked down at the ledger on his desk, weighing the pros and cons. Finally, he sighed slowly, as if finally resigning himself. "I can, but I have one condition. Let me rest 1 day a week." This time, it was Lewis's turn to be silent. In the current manpower shortage in the Red Tide territory, it did seem like a bit of a waste of talent, as he hadn't taken a day off all month. But then again, if Hilko continued working at this intensity, he might suddenly drop dead. Lewis sighed. "All right, deal." Hilko then wrote down a list of demon soil ingredients for Lewis. Most of the materials could be bought at the market in Frost Halberd City, but one name caused Lewis's gaze to linger for a moment. Demon marrow. "You really dare to ask, don't you?" Lewis laughed, looking up at Hilko. "I just listed according to the most standard proportions." Hilko shrugged. "Of course. You can use substitutes, but the effect might. Without demon marrow, the effectiveness of the demon soil will be greatly reduced, right?" Lewis directly pointed out. Hilko spread his hands, saying nothing. Lewis rubbed his brow. Demon marrow was indeed a bit pricey. The Red Tide territory did have it, in the mines to the northwest, but there were some minor difficulties in extracting it. The technique of extraction was manageable, even with the most basic method. Having the locals use pickaxes to knock on the veins could at least get some to make demon soil. However, that wasn't the real problem. The real issue was, according to the intelligence system, several frost giants had been frequently roaming near the mining area since spring. Frost giants, one of the most troublesome demons in the Northern Territory. They usually inhabit extremely cold regions, with huge bodies, immense strength, and skin as hard as ice, making it difficult for ordinary weapons to inflict effective damage. What's more troublesome is that they can manipulate cold air, creating chilling storms that slow enemies and even freeze them to death. Previously, Lewis hadn't hurried to deal with this issue. On one hand, Red Tide territory was in the development phase, focusing on agriculture and production. leaving no time to deal with the mines. On the other hand, the mining area was far from residential areas, and the giants posed no real threat to the territory. Additionally, at that time, they had little understanding of frost giants, and acting rashly would have been too risky, so he only dispatched a few knights to observe them in hiding to gather more intelligence. But now, the situation was different. In recent months, the intelligence system had gradually provided some information about the weaknesses of frost giants, and the territory's development had entered a stable phase. It was time to actively resolve this hidden threat. Since they had to extract demon marrow anyway, they might as well clear out the mining area, bringing this resource fully under Red Tide Territory's control. After pondering for a moment, Lewis promptly took action. He first summoned two knights, handed them Hilko's list, and said, "Go to Frost Halberd City and purchase the alchemy materials on this list, as quickly as possible." Yes, the knights took the list and hurriedly left. Next, he summoned Knight Captain Lambert and instructed, "Lambert, gather all the knights and prepare for battle." Lambert was slightly taken aback but asked no questions, immediately responding, "As you command, my lord." "The target is the Northwest Mountain Range. To subdue the frost giants," Lewis stated firmly. Continuing, "Gather everyone. No mistakes allowed." "Yes," Lambert replied decisively, then stood up and left with large strides. Soon, the Knights of Red Tide Territory quickly assembled, horses neighing, charging towards the mines in the northwest of Red Tide Territory. Lewis stood on a concealed rock on the mountain, overlooking an open area in the valley below, for frost giants were throwing boulders, then using their enormous ice rock staffs to hit them. Playing joyfully. "Are they playing baseball?" Lewis quipped, but remained vigilant. These colossal creatures averaged a height of 52 meters, their bodies covered in natural armor interwoven with ice crystals and rock fragments. Just looking at the knotted texture of their muscles is enough to evoke thoughts of terrifying brute strength. The casually swung ice rock staff was a full 6 meters long, and could leave a deep crevice in the ground when it struck. Even more frightening is the layer of pale blue frost mist that surrounds the frost giants, their realm of extreme cold. If a regular person got too close, their blood circulation would stall, and they might even be frozen into an ice statue. Thankfully, there were only 4. If there were 40, Lewis would be fleeing the Red Tide Territory overnight. Nervous? Not exactly. He had already grasped the frost giants' weaknesses and had set traps in advance. On top of that, he had brought along most of the Red Tide Territory's knights and hundreds of soldiers this time. 53 knights against 4 frost giants. The advantage is ours. "Is everyone ready?" Lewis asked softly. "Yes, sir. Everyone is in position," the officer responded. "Good." Lewis nodded slightly. "Execute the plan. Let these big guys taste our Red Tide Territory's methods." He slowly raised his right hand, fingers closed. Action. The officer waved the large flag, and the knights ambushed at various points sprang into action simultaneously. Whoosh! A whizzing arrow tore through the sky, dragging a fiery red trail, striking the body of the frost giants. Disrupted by the sudden attack, the 4 frost giants, who were happily playing, paused briefly, then let out a deafening roar. Their giant feet stomped the ground, angrily advancing towards the flames. "Separate them," Lambert shouted. The knights divided into 4 groups, harassing the giants from different directions, using their spears to provoke them. Every attack precisely hit the giants' most sensitive parts: knees, faces, between fingers, underarms. The giants roared, raising their ice rock staffs to sweep across, intending to crush these insect-like enemies. But the knights were prepared, quickly retreating, using the terrain and their speed to delay, guiding the giants into the ambush zones. A few minutes later, the 4 giants had been fully separated, entering different trap areas. Release. The ambush team that had been lying in wait suddenly threw the specially prepared weighty nets. The heavy ropes accurately entangled the giants' legs. The giants' steps faltered as they struggled to tear the restraints. The hidden knights on the flanks rapidly advanced, their sharp spear tips or long swords thrusting into the weak points behind the giants' knees. Puff! The spears pierced their cold flesh, where the ice armor was at its thinnest. Each stab made the giants let out earth-shattering roars, staggering back in pain. Retreat, switch positions. The warriors, unwilling to get bogged down in the fight, quickly spread out in different directions, leaving no chance for the giants to counterattack. The giants let out painful wails, kneeling on one knee, their struggles becoming sluggish. On the other side, The soldiers waiting in ambush hurled torches, the flames licking at the giant's sturdy ice armor. Soon, their extreme cold aura began to waver, and the surface of the ice armor started to crack under the heat. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The archers took their chance, shooting flaming arrows, the arrows slicing through the night, directly targeting the giants' faces. Several arrows accurately struck the giants' eyes and cheeks, the flames searing their flesh. Roar! The giants clutched their faces in agony, struggling violently. Knights, prepare. Target the heart and throat. Kill. The knights activated their fighting energy, the red fighting energy blazing on their long swords and spears. They spurred their horses forward, like piercing red blades, ruthlessly stabbing at the giants' hearts and throats. Blood sprayed, and the first giant let out one final wail before its body crashed to the ground. Of course, the other teams didn't have it all as smooth. From one trap area came a deafening giant roar. Roar! It was an especially ferocious frost giant, its massive body breaking free of the rope net. Merely a slight press from its sturdy leg shook the trap-filled ground, sending stones flying. Damn it, this trap can't hold it. The lead knight's face changed, just as he was about to order the team to ray and circle. The giant had gone completely berserk. It suddenly spread its arms wide, roaring towards the sky, the cold aura surging. A wild frost storm violently swept in all directions. Boom! The storm carried countless sharp ice blades, instantly covering the entire region. The wind tore through the earth, catching the knights off guard, flipping them over with a strong gust. Two apprentice knights were caught in the storm, their armor instantly coated with a thick layer of frost, freezing them stiff. They were then swept by the wind, thrown hard against the rock walls, losing their ability to fight. Another official knight, yet to react, was hit by the giant's sweeping staff. He flew like a kite with a broken string dozens of meters away, crashing to the ground, blood spilling profusely from his mouth. The scene plunged into chaos at once. Just as the frost giant was about to sweep its staff again, a red fighting energy suddenly sliced through the blizzard, slashing straight at the giant's wrist. Puff! The scorching sword energy tore along, narrow wound on the giant's cold iron muscles, with dark blue blood spraying out, quickly freezing into ice crystals as it hit the snow. Cut its leg. Lambert shouted angrily, raising his giant sword high, enveloped in intense fighting energy, aiming at the giant's knee. Two elite knights followed closely, forming a triangular attack formation, charging the giant. Ha! Lambert's giant sword slashed down fiercely, targeting the joint behind the giant's knee. Crack! The sword embedded deeply into the ice armor, cutting into the tendons. The giant's immense body shuddered violently, nearly kneeling. Another elite knight took the opportunity to leap, his long sword burning with flame fighting energy, thrusting into the giant's ribs. The last knight struck at the giant's ankle, trying to completely destroy its balance. Three swords landed together, the intense pain driving the giant into a furious rage, letting out a sky-rending roar, intending to counterattack with its staff once more. Stop it! Lambert roared, stomping the ground fiercely, leaping up again. The giant's sword reversed, slicing horizontally, the blade targeting the giant's wrist joint precisely. Crack! The sound of bone cracking was clearly audible. The giant's grasp on the staff slackened as the massive ice rock staff slipped from its fingers, crashing to the ground, sending ice splinters flying. Now, behind him, the knights raised their spears, accompanied by thunderous roars, all weapons simultaneously thrusting into the giant's vital points. Puff! The icy blood splattered, staining the snow red. This frenzied giant could no longer sustain itself, its massive body crashing down, completely lifeless. The corpse of the frost giant lay sprawled on the ground, its massive body devoid of life, and the air was thick with the stench of blood. Soldiers busied themselves cleaning the battlefield, while knights tended to their comrades' injuries. Fortunately, we had adequate preparation, so the casualties were not too severe. Most people only suffered minor frostbite or scratches, which could be treated with the ointments and bandages they carried with them. A few physicians were busy nearby, bandaging wounds and applying warm ointment to prevent the cold from penetrating the body. But only the knight who was flung by the rampaging frost giant was gravely injured. He was pale, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, and his armor had been shattered by the giant, leaving a deep indentation in his chest. It was clear that his ribs were broken, and his internal organs were likely seriously damaged as well. Though he still had faint breathing, whether he could make it through was unknown. A physician kneeled by his side, his expression grave. The injuries are too severe. Conventional treatment won't work. The surrounding knights looked uneasy. After all, he was their comrade. Just moments ago, they had fought side by side, and now, he lay here on the brink of death. He cannot die. Everyone looked up to see Louis already standing nearby. He slowly retrieved a deep green crystal bottle from his bosom, the liquid inside emitting a faint glow. It was an extremely precious life potion, capable of quickly healing wounds and even pulling a severely injured person back from the brink of death. This kind of potion was so cherished by the nobility that it would not be used unless absolutely necessary. Without saying much, Louis knelt on one knee and personally poured the potion into the wounded man's mouth. As the potion entered, a miracle slowly unfolded. The previously shallow breathing became steady, and a touch of color returned to his pale cheeks. The sunken chest gently expanded, the broken bones began to heal, and the torn internal tissues gradually restored. His nearly stagnant heartbeat regained strength. The breath of life returned to the brink of death night. His life is no longer in danger. The physician breathed a sigh of relief. But as to how well he will recover, that depends on his fate. The knights watched the scene, their gazes complex. They looked at Louis, their eyes full of reverence, astounded that Louis would use such a precious potion on a knight. Their loyalty to Louis increased. +1, +1, +1. Lord, Lambert said softly, such a potion shouldn't be wasted on him. Louis got up, smiling calmly. He fought for me, for Red Tide territory. How is it a waste to use it on him? His gaze swept across everyone present, his voice firm. Those who are loyal to me, I will never easily abandon. For a moment, all the knights straightened their backs in silence. They pressed their hands over their hearts, responding with the knight salute, saying nothing but expressing more than any oath. Truthfully, Louis felt a pang of regret for the potion as well. This was a life-saving potion his full-blooded sister secretly gave him before heading to the Northern Territory, and he had only 3 bottles. The first bottle was used on the unconscious Sif, the second on this severely injured knight. Now, only 1 bottle remained in his possession. The thought filled him with conflicting emotions. It would be a lie to say he didn't feel a pang of regret, as this was something that could save a life, and in a critical moment, it might just save his own life. Yet, he used it like that, though he had no regrets. He saved Sif, and perhaps in the future, this little princess of the Cold Moon tribe might bring some value. He saved this night too, making the soldiers of Red Tide territory aware that their lord won't easily forsake them. Gathering cohesion. Never mind, I'll leave the last bottle for myself, Louis sighed softly, casually storing the empty bottle back into his bosom. Next, came the awarding of merits and rewards. Louis solemnly stood before everyone as a lord, personally bestowing rewards on everyone who had earned merit. In this campaign, we exterminated for frost giants. Everyone made contributions. Perhaps other lords might not specially host a ceremony to award achievements, but I am different. Merit should be rewarded. He paused, noticing the expectant eyes of those in front of him, his mouth twitching slightly. However, I suppose you are aware I am truly poor. The soldiers exchanged looks, then burst into laughter. Louis shrugged helplessly. But since you've achieved merit, there must be some benefits. After saying this, cheers and applause erupted on sight. The rewards were simple fresh fish, game, grain, and a small amount of gold coins. Yet no one showed a hint of dissatisfaction, because in their hearts, they knew Louis had done enough. He wasn't a lord who merely promised empty words. He was willing to save his soldiers, even after they fought bloodily. Despite being strapped for cash, he would do his utmost to give them rewards. Moreover, the vast majority of lords would not bother giving achievements and rewards when dispatching troops to eradicate aliens or demons. Once the battle was over, sending troops back for rest was considered a favor. But Louis was different. Their lord would personally stand and acknowledge their achievements, pledging more rewards in the future. This is what they valued most. It's our honor to serve the Lord. May the dragon ancestor bless Red Tide territory. All the soldiers and knights bore no grievances and even felt grateful. They happily accepted the not-so-lavish rewards, wearing satisfied smiles. The question of how to deal with the giant corpses rose. The Northern Territory lacked food. Every piece of meat was precious. If these were ordinary game, they would have been skinned and processed into jerky for preservation. But frost giants, after all, were humanoid creatures. Looking at those massive corpses, Louis felt some resistance. Moreover, even though the Red Tide territory's resources were limited, it hadn't reached the point where such means were necessary to fill stomachs. Don't eat them. Take them all back for processing, he decisively ordered. The knights had no objections, as their lord always acted with principles. But abandoning the corpses seemed like a waste. After all, the bodies of these frost giants contained vast cold energy, even in death. Their flesh was rich with special nutrients. With this thought, inspiration struck Louis. If we can't eat them, let's put them to good use. They can be made into fertilizer. Fertilizer. Lambert was briefly stunned, then nodded thoughtfully. This was indeed a good idea. The giant's flesh, rich with magic essence, could significantly improve the land scarcity issue of the Red Tide territory. If processed appropriately, take them back and hand them over to the agricultural official, Mike. So, the soldiers began to clean the battlefield, loading the giant corpses onto makeshift wooden frames, and slowly transporting them back to the Red Tide territory with horses.